Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is story about what if Naruto hadn't been left alone as a child part 1. Before I start, please do support for more amazing content and comments for part 2. Do consider to subscribe my channel and share my video to your friends and check out the description as well. Let's start the video. The Naruto manga that she had known was vague. Most important things, most memories were vague. She knew once her name had started with AV. Once she'd lived in a world of computers and internet and weapons of mass destruction. Of great generous souls who taught by example, often killed by the people they protected. She remembered the language English and the countries and small things. Foods mostly, and textures, and morals considered acceptable though often they fled. There were snippets of a school system and work and being almost middle-aged but single. She'd had a bad relationship or two and no children. She remembered blonde hair and blue eyes and being soft voluptuous, others had said. V knew those things. They'd just always been in the back of her mind, where some other children daydreamed she'd had these. They just were. They were true, and it was something she knew. She also knew there'd been a manga, an anime perhaps, though to explain it was something that escaped her completely. But the point was she knew it had mimicked this world just enough to make her pay attention more than she would have without those dreams that she knew were real. And what had remained of V, had instead of dragging up anything it could possibly recall, instead had nudged her. Forced her to focus, to pay attention, but faded. You can only live in one world at a time after all. These days, and perhaps always V was instead known as Anrei. Or Rika-chan to some. The Akiryo clan were distantly related to the Inuzuka, enough that they were usually thought to be the same clan. Actually, Anrei was used to being called Rika Anrei Inuzuka-chan, which was a mouthful. Only the few who knew better, and her Inuzuka cousins, called her Ikiero. The Akiryo were wanderers, lone wolves who explored and traveled. They were not more akin to Ronin than shinobi. They still owed their loyalty to their clan and lesser extent their village after all. However, they were a breed apart. The cousins were rare, and known to be unable to harness the Inuzuka clan jutsus and similar. They instead had their own specific clan traits and jutsus that were useful. Anrei's father, Ryo, had been relatively unknown. He'd found a mate though, as her clan thought of partners, in a beautiful fiery Inuzuka who had lost her nin dog. They bonded well and Anrei was the result. She carried Rika's name as her middle name, and the Inuzuka tended to call her Rika Chibi-chan. The little girl had greatly disliked it. Anrei was a bright if often quiet compared to the Inuzuka kid's child. She read, and read voraciously. She studied and thought, often drew images that made no sense in an effort to calm her torrential minds. After all, she did have V that was still settling into her memories. In the end, however, despite the blue markings on her face rather than Inuzuka red, they were Akiryo blue, and her golden eyes that were undeniably wolfish. Anrei's hair was a brindled gray and blue coloration, bits of black and white against dark slate blue in many wild patterns set her apart. She was the wild wolf to the Inuzuka's dogs. Somehow, this did not trouble her. V once remarked that she'd never heard of the Akiryo, though she knew the Inuzuka barely, but the voice had faded over the years. Whomever she had once been as V, she was no longer. The whispers of thought and emotion though still were privately led V to her, a friend, if one doomed to be forgotten. You could only live one life at a time. Anrei found herself irritated most of the time outside her clan. People spoke but didn't mean their words. They acted, they smiled or laughed, and meant none of it. Things were straightforward with Inuzuka, and though far more reserved, most of the time, same with the Akiryo. Though, there was only herself and her sire in Konoha, because of the Kyubi. All the other known Akiryo had perished that were not out exploring, and due to the ongoing conflicts there were few of those remaining. It was entirely plausible the only Akiryo left were the two of them. Her mother was Inuzuka, and a breed apart, not having their bloodline jutsus, instead having her own. It was the sole reason Ryo had spent hours poring over scrolls explaining every idea, theory, and possible jutsu of Tier family he'd ever heard even passingly referenced just in case. Though her sire tried, he could only prepare her so much for what came next. The academy, it wasn't as if Anrei was that old. She was barely 7, it was the same year the Kyubi had attacked, and yet because of the recent horrors, the academy was in severe teaching mode still. They were desperate to replace the lost teams, the lost manpower. So many ninja had been forced into desk jobs or retirement due to trauma that the able bodies were high in demand. It meant the pressure on students was much more strict. And Anrei really blamed it on her bloodline and V that she had issues with authority, which would be why she was currently tussling with a Hyuga a year above her for trying to correct her substitution jutsu. Only he'd used it as an excuse to apply too much pressure to her hands. Seems Oki, whatever, she didn't care what his full name was still furious. He couldn't beat her in taijutsu. The problem lay in the fact that unlike her Inuzuka cousins, Akiryo tended to be reserved and wait for their moment to strike. When they did have temper set off though, they'd release it in a torrent that made even the Inuzuka cower with their tails between their legs, and Oki had just always pissed her off. The smug Hyuga stank, he was acrid and oily and all his special eyes did was make the stench worse. So when he'd applied pressure to her hands, which were still sore from his jabbing at her chakra points even if he didn't actually close the points off, she'd snapped. She could feel the startled eyes of her yearmates, and hear vaguely a number of her fellow students cheering her on. Her cousins being very loud about it. Still, they knew better than any that when Anrui snapped, it was seemingly with no warning. They'd heard the faintest of growls, the telltale stillness of her form that was a predator preparing rather than a ninja observing. Her favorite cousin, Sum, was currently hooting loudly despite being a few years above her. She was about to graduate, but she was screeching out encouragement for her baby cousin who was utterly thrashing the Hyuga. When Anrui leapt away finally, with a disdainful snort and started walking towards her teachers, she didn't even watch her back. Hyuga Oki wasn't going to be able to stand on his own for a while, where most clan children were open-mouthed, and weren't the other Hyuga and Uchiha and Yamanaka just horror-filled. The Inuzuka all gave a soft chuffing sound as she passed by. They wouldn't express approval, not here, but it was no scolding Anrui would go home to. That is why she met the gaze of the angry teach with a smirk. Ikirio did not back down. They also tended to get smacked around by fate for it. So it seemed to go hand in hand. Inuzuka Anrui, the teacher, began. His voice was frustrated. Young, new to the job. Anrui just gave him a look, not bothering to correct him. This was a favorite tactic of theirs, scolding in front of peers. Shaming. It was effective. Well, on most. You have disobeyed a crucial academy rule and suspension over the fact that I had interference from someone who, although skilled, is not authorized to teach, nor was instructed to do so by one of the teachers. Anrui interrupted casually. She could feel the silent ohu from her classmates, but she didn't do it for that. Her eyes narrowed instead on her teacher. Her suspicions had always been a good influence, and instinct was saying something was off. She wriggled her nose then, and what she had missed before. Kai! The genjutsu broke and her eyes widened, looking around with a deep growl. When I get my hands on you, Ibiki. The shaved head of her friend was there suddenly as the older man grinned down at her. Yes, Chibi? Anure's huff and turning away spoke volumes, much to Inochi's amusement. They were far from T&I, and some of the only ninja who knew about her. Do you have to do that? Yes. Unspoken was, if I don't seem to pick on you, people may forget your cover. His monosyllabic answer caused Inochi to roll his eyes even as the three resumed drinking their tea. To anyone else, anyone outside of the highest level of trusted authority, which was essentially the Hokage and the two men with her, thought Anrui had dropped out of the academy. She'd never had a genin team, she'd been snapped up for specialized training, not one of Danzo's, though he was curious about what of her abilities there were. They were specifically needed to tie into her emotions, and thus useless for his highest level of Umbu. Instead, she was a very specific sort of information gatherer. She'd be assigned to very few ninja. Both of the two with her had been her partners at times, providing the heavy hitting while she did the true stealth. She was the secret within the secrets of a secret village. It was complicated. As far as everyone else in Konoha knew, she was one of those didn't make it to graduation but still had some skills civilians. The Inuzuka adored all their clan, but since she didn't have a nin dog, she lived on the farthest edge of the compound, abutting the forest. She'd help out with the dogs and generally was thought to be tolerated with Love, the strange cousin in the group. You should come to dinner next week, Ibiki commented. Anrui listened, curious as she scented Inoichi freeze up. Blondie found a girl. All the best friends harassed each other, you know? Anrui took another sip of her tea, and chuckled faintly. He's not serious, just wants in her pants. She tapped her nose, both Ibiki and Anrui smirking at their blonde friend who rolled his eyes. He could get into people's minds, but Ibiki was capable of twisting your thoughts around in a sick, demented way, and Anrui's nose was ridiculously sensitive. She was heavily sensitive to all energies as well, not just chakra, which meant as a trio they were. Well, no one knew that the devilish duo had a literal third component. The other two, who were acknowledged special jounin, were thought to just be keeping in touch with a pretty former classmate. They'd kept the illusion of being friendly after Anrui failed to the point no one blinked these days. Ibiki and Inoichi were two you just didn't mess with, for all the two had skyrocketed to advancing once in torture and investigation. Anrui was just their bizarre little friend who would bring food and demand company. Ninjas looked underneath the underneath, but they so often forgot to suspect that things were in plain sight. Anrui finally sighed and looked up, eyes locking with her two best friends. Two slight nods, not at the same time, and barely even movement to sip their tea alerted her of the truth. She'd been called back to active duty. Peculiar, not that she found out anything until she went over to Ibiki's later that day. It was a private joke, even as the three walked towards their bald friend's apartment, that people didn't think he lived in a normal home. Ibiki was a neat freak though, and his home was so comfortable it was clear he refused to take his work home. Privacy seals slammed into place as the windows shut, that the other two had gone through while Anrui, to keep up appearances, went through the door. She went to raid her friend's chocolate stash, and then sat down in the oversized couch, waiting. The Hokage is worried. Anrui just waited. Inoichi, the hair fiend that he was, sat behind her to undo the long braid she wore and started to play with her brindled hair. The creature attacked not that long ago, and he grimaced, running his hand over his uncovered head. Around them, he had no need to keep up his walls. We may have heard one of the other villages sealed one better copying able to harness it properly. It may be a rumor. Anrui leaned back into Inoichi. These two, they were pack. They were family. The rest of the Inuzuka didn't know, no one did. Just these two, her former special operations teammates, and the Hokage. Inoichi still playing with her hair as the woman looked up at her equally young friends. They weren't hardly teenagers, not anymore. You can't go? Anrui finally spoke, her voice as soft and sweet and seemingly unsuited to her as ever. Ibiki sank into the floor at her feet, his head on her knee as her nails, slightly longer with her heritage, ever so carefully ran over his damaged skin. From a mission she hadn't been on, neither had Inoichi. It was the last Ibiki went into the field without them, and it was a long time ago. Every year was a decade to a ninja. Her question wasn't really, but it was confirmed by the silence of the two with her, making her sigh. Who? Her voice was soft, resigned. Briefly Ibiki tensed, and she scented Inoichi's distress. It was understood. Both her packmates were possessive, fierce, they claimed her as their packmate, their sister, as much as she did them. Others saw what they presented, but since the death of her father on a mission, these two, only a few months out of graduation at 12, had decided she was their sister. She was theirs. Their wolf. Their ghost. The sadistic one, Ibiki, who terrified even his own predecessor. The unavoidable, one from whom your thoughts weren't safe, Inoichi, who excelled at his clan's bloodline gift to such a level that anything Ibiki couldn't force out, he was able to rip away. And in her place in the shadows, forgotten as fitted her role. Anrei, the ghost. The one who couldn't pass the academy tests because she couldn't use chakra like others did, but held her own utterly fearsome clan jutsus that used her specialized chakra in ways that couldn't be duplicated. The Akiryo were named after all, because they could literally become like ghosts. She could be intangible, unsentable, inaudible in great rare situations, though it was utterly draining she could even pass unseen. The mere intangible aspect had meant if Ibiki could find a way in, and Inoichi could allow for keeping an eye out, Anrei had been able to get in and out of anywhere. But since she couldn't use her chakra as others did, she required someone else to take the hits, to protect and defend. Perhaps others had been better suited, but only her two older friends had been accepted by her instincts. The three of them, unknown to all but the Hokage, had gotten information in and out of places that would have quite literally never been possible otherwise. Anrei had learned ways to use her jutsu from Ibiki's twisted thogets that her ancestors had never considered, such as going intangible and then solid to rip out hearts, or collapse windpipes. She could phase certain things with her, but it wasn't easy, and the longer she'd had them on her person to coat in her usual chakra, the better. So Anrei always was covered in saban and the like. They'd actually pinned her down and wrapped her carefully in chakra wire once she'd not forgotten it since. But it seemed this time, her mind and her nerve, as she personally called her packmates, would not be with her. Thank you? Anrei's voice was soft. Either of the three spoke often when it wasn't needed. They'd made sure she knew ahead of time. They'd been there to comfort her, and to receive it. That deserved to be vocalized. Tomorrow, Akiryo, you go back in the field. Inoichi spoke the words. Ibiki so rarely was in need of comfort, but this time he was. It spoke enough about the mission he couldn't share with her. Not officially, not yet. So Inoichi would take this burden. It'll be with them, but we will brief them, we'll make certain all is good. But there was a slight tug on the brindled hair, and Anrei's eyes were then locked with Inoichi's. Clear, amber eyes met his own blue, and he smiled faintly at his little sister. You know, she nodded. They were shinobi. Nothing was a guarantee. Stay. Ibiki spoke again from his spot on the floor, and two chuckles were his only answer. Even ninja needed their friends. Anrei was just touched, both of them cared so much. She'd never found a dog to bond to. Her nature preferred the wilds and the wolves, but these two, from the first time they'd demanded to know why she couldn't perform the jutsu they'd been learning, they'd been forced to be tutors to lesser grades to make up for some horrid thing they'd done, had been there for her. They were her pack. A sense of danger's coming nudged her as she slipped into unconsciousness that night, curled up around her two packmates in a pile of blankets and cushions on the floor. The two had long since realized she needed physical contact with them, and after some very funny "I like girls" from both of the young men had adjusted. Still, her instincts were never wrong. Tomorrow things would change. She rather pitied the umbu her two brothers warned about working with her. Ibiki was satisfied. Crane had likely never been so traumatized in his life. He was shaking, and even if it was barely visible, Ibiki was a torture expert for a reason. The sheer amount of killing intent and warnings that went into ensuring Crane would never speak of anything that Fox would do would have made a lesser shinobi pass out. It was a twist of fate that since the nine-tailed attack, the Fox mask had basically been retired. When it was brought out, it was for special operations that were not umbu but required secrecy. The first time Anrei had been handed the Fox mask, she'd rolled her eyes and grumbled that at least it was kind of related to her blood, and hadn't that caused an uproar? Unintentional destruction of umbu minds. Inoichi'd had to do a lot of mental erasing after that. He'd appreciated the practice, of course. Not to mention the warped sense of humor. Crane felt sweat trail down the back of his neck as Ibiki finally let him out. Any potential levity he felt towards what seemed a simple infiltration mission had vanished. If Ibiki was threatening his professional conduct before he'd even gotten the official orders, this was far more than he had anticipated. Crane had a flawless record of keeping secrets too, but from all the repetition on how his partner would have specific bloodline traits that were an S-class secret for the village. His curiosity was fully roused, but it seemed like it may have some brutal payoff. Ah, Crane Nabiki. Crane, this is Fox, your partner for this mission. I don't think I need to remind both of you results are more important than speed. The two nodded, both utterly silent. Fox had her long hair twisted and secured under a headscarf, much more practical than just leaving it out in the open and easier to hide under the umbu cloaks they'd be using soon. You are going to an outer village in Kiri's territory, masquerade as civilians if you need, but do not be caught. The Hokage gave them an even look and Crane was startled. This was a mission a bit more serious than he usually was pulled in for. Crane, you're very visually identifiable. I presume you can change that? Crane nodded, but Fox was the first to act. After all, Crane was processing orders, highly unusual still. Anrei had her two packmates get her used to what the hell are you thinking long ago. Her borrowed mask, cloak, and headband all were laid on his desk. Understood, Hokage-sama? We are to travel as civilians as soon as beyond Konoha's borders. The Hokage nodded and sealed her items she had set down, passing the scroll to her. It was only then Crane realized she'd not been in typical umbu attire. Crane, you will stay as you are. Escort your partner out the gate, and they shouldn't ask for papers. Do not let anyone find out. He paused then, and Anrei nodded, her golden eyes sharp and cold as usual. Ibiki inwardly smirked, knowing if for whatever reason Crane was hesitant, she'd obliterate any evidence of their association herself. Inuzuka were loyal. Ikirio were more so. Anrei turned and nodded to Crane. I will meet you at the gate. I am packed. With that she turned and walked out, not too unusual for one of the ungraduated who were talented to meet with the Hokage after all. Crane Ibiki stepped forward then at Sarutobi's glance and sighed. Your role in this, as stated, is to be the backup and the manpower. Crane, you are to at no time reveal you know Fox upon completion of this mission. This is a great deal of trust you are being given. Ibiki trailed off and Crane saluted silently. He understood. There were other, flashier, perhaps more well-known ninja, of course. Many would have guessed pairing Asuma or Kurenhai for all they were not umbu. The difference was, it took a specific sort of heavy-hitting ninja to handle Anrei, and Ibiki had not even glanced at the newer recruits, newly promoted, or the more unstable than usual. Those who handled assassinations most of the time were a terrible match for his packmate. Fox can in some situations turn aggressive and dangerous. She may even turn on you. In this situation, Sarutobi completed, his eyes serious. You are to incapacitate. You are to return. Her mission is the confirmation of intelligence, yours is her safety. Is that understood? If you feel it is necessary, you withdraw. If you are compromised, you obliterate evidence and withdraw. Crane saluted one more time, then at the gesture, vanished. Marino, I hope you are certain. Sarutobi gave him a look and Ibiki just nodded. Sarutobi had wanted to send the infamous Kakashi, and Ibiki had overruled it. So had Inoichi. It was dangerous refusing their Hokage, but they knew with how unstable Kakashi could be, while a vicious fighter, he was still damaged. Crane was peculiar but should work well with Anrei. Very well, Marino, I suppose we shall see. You did warn her about her partner? Ibiki gave one of his infamous low chuckles. You forget, Hokage-sama, her nose. Switching to Anrei's POV, getting out of the gate and seeing the guards was easy. I had an umbu escort, not that they would see him leave with me. Though we had said to meet at the gate, it was enough of a code that anyone Ibiki led around me for something of this nature would know I'd head out ahead. I needed to get far enough he could show up and remove his mask and gear, after all. The two stationed at the gate waved me by with only a cursory check. One was my Inuzuka cousin Inu. Highly original, wasn't it? We did love to tease him, but considering his father had been drunk from trying to steady his nerves well, I had no illusions. My packmates were highly protective, half for their affection and half because my bloodline trait was just useful. Still, I was about as useful as a specialized tool in a toolbox of thousands. I had my uses, my very specific uses. Otherwise I was a civilian. Sometimes it stung, the comradeship I saw in the ninjas outwardly acknowledged. I would never be part of that. My own clan had no idea what I got up to half the time. Inu just had nodded to me with a fanged grin because he knew all of us Akirio needed to wander and explore. It certainly wasn't the first time I stepped out for a vacation beyond Konoha, even if that was in the long run rather foolish. It was one of the few it was for a decent reason though. I'd only been walking for 20 minutes beyond the last scent of shinobi when I scented my partner. I didn't stop walking, but nodded my head as Crane fell into step beside me. He was fast then, very fast. I didn't turn my head either, my nose telling me all I needed to know. You are surprised? I am. The voice was low, rich, and evenly measured. It made me chuckle. When you present something so different to the village yourself? I was enjoying the sense my partner brought. Unlike so many, there was no deceit. Instead he smelled of sweat and the earth, a damp rich loam so like the forest we lived in. It was a calming steady scent. Trust Ibiki to have somehow picked up on it. My brothers had no senses such as mine, but over the years of being aware of how I perceived things, they had learned to pay much more attention to what they could smell. Cologne and perfumes irritated my nose, poison experts and those who exploded things made me gag. Aye, you are correct. Of course, it is so easy to misdirect when people are not thinking. Though I find I am quite surprised that you weren't. His voice almost stuttered and I chuckled, still not looking over. Oh, don't get too alarmed. I didn't graduate the academy. Didn't Marino-san explain things? He wouldn't have, of course, at least nothing direct or concrete. That was just not his way. He explained that your family made it. He paused and I hummed in delight that he'd avoided my bait. I'd been forced to work with others before who just failed miserably. Inoichi took care of them. Treat me like the civilians, please. My family gives me connections, but I am no ninja. Not as you think. I paused and then smiled over my shoulder up at my partner for this. He was a mountain, perhaps more like a landslide, but I was at ease around him. Ibiki had picked well, and even better, though he'd be insufferable for it. I would be admitting as much to him. And call me Anrei, Guy-san. Guy, of course, was a master of hiding in plain sight, I had learned. Oh, I had no doubt this wasn't his true self, so to speak. No, there was no falsehood in the green beast of Konoha. That was Guy when he was being honest to himself. The one I was traveling with was Crane Umbu. For all he had his mask off, and changing his hair so it was brushed off his face, wearing regular clothes with his reinforced gear hidden under long sleeves and loose cargo pants. No one would have guessed my companion, especially with his quiet, watchful nature, to be the same man. Inoichi had said all Umbu, and all shinobi to some extent, develop personality disorders. Crane was Guy's serious reserved self, the more lethal and dangerous side. From what I had learned over the few weeks we had been working together, learning each other's tells so we could play civilians better with each other, he was very much like his summons. Slow, methodical, wise. I didn't doubt that his exuberance and cheer the rest of the time was half coping mechanism and partly just who he desperately wished to be. In turn, Guy had taken to calling me Rika-chan, and I was keeping a thin layer of makeup over my stripes. That combined with a temporary dye in my hair that made it a muddy, rather ugly brown, left only my eyes. Enough people had a strange feature or two, though, that it didn't get much attention. Besides, I could keep my eyes downcast. We were playing off my being his childhood friend. We weren't going to try for being together, as neither of us wanted to fake that, and Inuzuka have things about our relationships that are just complex, and I couldn't call him family. Pack was a serious thing. The best lie has truth in it, so childhood friends, there'd been a year or two overlap at the academy we could play off. Just enough. It wasn't as if we told everyone, but having a story worked out in your head made life so much easier. In the end, the mission was time-consuming, but easy. I informed Guy of my intention to go every night, and half the time he went with me and kept an eye out. Once or twice he'd gotten in a fight with a local group of ruffians, non-ninja thankfully, while I slipped in and did my work. The first time he'd actually seen me ghost was funny. His expression lent credence to his green beast being his true self. One just didn't fake the enthusiasm afterward that he had struggled to keep at bay. Ghosting sounds terribly easy, almost elegant. It's hard as hell. Essentially, I warp my chakra in a way that my family just does, but it takes time and focus. The easiest for me, and my kin, is to go intangible. It's where our clan name Akirio comes from. When I'm doing this, I'm both here and not. My senses are dulled like this, but the other senses I can't explain it. When I'm between, I can hardly smell. My hearing and sight both take a hit. My touch? Non-existent. I can fade in and out, and the hell that Inoichi and Ibiki put me through to learn to just do so with a hand so I can grab things and take them with me. We don't speak of those days, but my awareness of chakra goes utterly through the roof. And not just chakra, everything has a vibration, an energy like this. I am aware of it. It's confusing as hell. So by the time we found that, yes, the rumors were just that, but somehow people had gotten a look at some sealed diagrams that just seemed, well, my instinct was screaming. It wasn't V, thankfully, so I knew it wasn't world-changing, but it was a big deal. I'd stolen the documents, and walked right back through the walls to nod at Guy. I then told him I'd meet him outside the city, to grab our things and meet me there, and vanished to sight. The more senses I hid myself from, the harder it got. These weren't my only abilities from my clan, but they were essentially the most useful. Well done. Guy was carrying me, silent for the most part, as he raced out of Kiri's territory. I could use chakra to enhance my abilities, thank the kami for small things and tree walk, but only at about chunin level. My chakra just didn't wish to play normal after all, so Guy was racing at a speed that was frankly amazing, and I was just being carried. It worked. We were in enemy territory, it so worked. Tensions were high with all the nations. It didn't matter if a war had ended. We were shinobi territory. A war was always going on. You two, I rested my eyes for a minute, letting Guy focus. I didn't think I'd mind working with Crane again. I was pretty sure Guy was going to be a pain in my butt, though if I caught him being youthful. We really are screwed up. Guy can run. Seriously, the man had us back in only a fraction of the time. I had been in Umbu attire, of course, as was Crane, for the entire time once we were back in Konoha. He let me run again too. I needed to switch out of my gear for entering the town alone. Guy had been startled when I'd asked him to seal my scroll. Apparently he had only a little chakra, but go figure, it still behaved for things like sealing scrolls. I could undo one, but I couldn't seal one worth a damn. And even unsealing only took blood, wasn't precisely a chakra feast. It was after checking in, after giving a report and Ibiki not being there he'll be smug later. Scroll turned over, gear returned, and having just used Ibiki's TNI captain's shower to get back to normal that I found something. Or maybe I should say, it found me. I couldn't recall because V, usually so quiet and not there, had given a sharp feeling of important. As a little yellow and orange blur slammed into me. Now, I'm not an all-around nice person. I'm selfish, I'm lazy, I'm vicious-tempered and like to be left alone most of the time. I do good things when I feel like it and I can. And so I can admit without any shame that if not for my little once I was UV, that whole thing, I would have just snarled and walked away. My instincts were screaming that this was danger and terrible, and I needed to get away. V had snapped into awareness so sharp I felt like Inoichi had found a new jutsu to use on my brain. A pinch almost, a feeling of lightheaded bubbles pretty. Yet, I had once been someone, and that always worked with my instincts. So instead I looked down and tilted my head, still wet hair clinging irritatingly to my neck, at the blonde kid. Maybe 5? 4? Awfully tiny Inuzuka temper started to rise but then faded. Blue puppy eyes, we just stared. And then slowly, the irony clicked into my brain. Golden hair and blue eyes. Blue brindled hair and gold eyes. Well fuck. Weren't we a match set? You shouldn't say that. The gasp from Pipsqueak didn't really work when he was trying to smother his giggles. He made me grin. I could feel one of my fangs poking through my smile and shrugged. I'm an adult, Pipsqueak. I like to curse. I like ramen. He spoke half loud, mostly at the end. The first part though was just ever so slightly quieter, unsure. Hey, you pick things up when your brothers are information freaks. It was said as if a great secret, so I chuckled and nodded. I like yakisoba. Well, look at that. I can talk to kids that aren't Inuzuka. Tsim's gonna be so proud of me. Okay, enough of that. I nodded once more and waved. Later, Pipsqueak. I thought nothing else of it. I really didn't, you know, until there was an orange-clad little hell spawn in my yard a few days later, and then outside my favorite tea shop, watching me at the park when I was reading. I had a chibi stalker. Dang it. My brothers are going to laugh themselves silly. Correction. My brothers were gasping for air, half incredulous, and half just being annoying little pricks. It was a few weeks after my mission with Crane, and this was my mandatory open up to the big bad sadist and mind reader in order to debrief. aka brothers got to pick on me. They loved this part of things a little too much. Oh, they were professional, seriously, but there was lots of teasing and harassment thrown in. We'd gone over every last inch of my mission, because of course the numerous fights and ninja we'd killed in the process didn't make it into my report. Not the official one. It was a precaution. No one ever thought the reports, despite all their safety features, were entirely safe. It's why verbal was the only acknowledged form of me or my abilities in the files. Half of Ibiki's harassment of Crane was actually ensuring he would be breaking protocol, which after years of following it or being harshly treated, had been most of what had shaken the Umbu. Verbally, just the two of them and myself in a nice dim little room with tolerably comfortable chairs and a table for hours. I got the tolerable comfort because they adored me. And tea. Jasmine tea was a big weakness of mine. Of course, I always checked it. Every sip. Ibiki had slipped poison and drugs in them plenty of times. Sibling pranks, shinobi were messed up. Attempting to kill was showing you cared. Not growing up because our childhoods had been ruthlessly suppressed to create soldiers also resulted in crazy immature behaviors. So, back to the real point, continue with the altercation. Inoichi chuckled as I had just finished explaining how Crane had disposed of several civilian thugs with clothing off a nearby clothesline since we had been leaving a bathhouse. Unarmed. Well, as far as they'd known. Since we were playing civilians, we couldn't be seen using weaponry after all. Kiri's outer villages were just as freakishly paranoid. You always did the normal things when blending. Since I still predominantly was a civilian, it is why my role officially on any mission was to be a sort of guide. The shinobi would follow my lead as I would go through a normal day. You'd be shocked at how many things shinobi just didn't think of that we take for granted. Like doing the laundry, getting groceries, haggling, flirting. Although, the first time I had to inform any shinobi or Kwanichi that they should be flirting because in drawing that sort of attention they'd be ignored. Most shinobi had zero ideas how to not be spotted when pretending to be normal if they were in mission mode. I felt my fangs showing as I grinned, a fully Inuzuka wicked smirk. So the fabric ripped, and the next one he grabbed happened to be small and with a lace pattern. I spread my hands as Inoichi and Ibiki twitched, guessing where this was going. And he strangled the man with a baby blue thong. His expression when he looked down, I had to pause as Inoichi lost his composure. Well, for a shinobi. There was a gleam to his eyes and his shoulders shook as he coughed. Ibiki just snorted. I suppose I shall have to find him a gift for his birthday this year in baby blue. Ibiki. Don't ever change. Really though, it is astounding. Inoichi commented thoughtfully. He was scrolling through Crane's official report. Mostly I was clarifying details that would not be recorded. I wasn't supposed to be more than I was after all. Inoichi and Ibiki needed the information though, not so much because of the mission but with everything they drilled into me for years. Sometimes I noticed something that another shinobi, even Umbu, didn't pick up on the significance of. Again, hellish years with my packmates. We don't discuss that. Somehow, no matter what, Crane or Guy always get into implausible situations. I don't think I have ever heard of strangling an enemy civilian thug, while pretending to be a civilian, and carefully hiding his skills and abilities with a woman's thong. I cleared my throat. Ibiki's eyes widened and I grinned even more. It wasn't a woman's thong. Crane did it with a banana hammock, I think they're called now. I was treated to the pleasure of seeing my brothers roar in laughter. Sipping my tea, I didn't doubt that there were a lot of people terrified even if we had privacy seals up. Deep laughter carried through the stonework, and Ibiki and Inoichi only laughed when someone needed to be afraid. All Inoichi still twitched, fighting off a smile. Some time later, Ibiki had poured me a cup of tea and I'd glared at him as I caught the scent of a hallucinogen. We bickered for a while, mostly Ibiki whining in his own way that he thought he'd finally found a truly odorless form. I got a new cup of tea. This one was fine. Really, if he didn't try at least 4 times in a visit, I knew something was wrong. How heavily guarded were the plans, anyways? Inoichi locked his blue eyes with mine and I nodded. Several high-ranking shinobi. 2 weren't from Kiri, they didn't smell like it but had the marks. My guess is they're on loan or recently back from elsewhere. There were a lot of traps. Physical, chakra-powered, 3 were genjutsu. I paused, closing my eyes halfway, and snorted out once. It wasn't a pretty habit, but blocking out sense would help me focus. I'd gone in full ghost, so none triggered. I was able to avoid the chakra-based ones, but just barely. I had to pass through a few pillars. Luckily they didn't include them. It was an old storehouse and wood is easier to go through. I paused then, and gave them a serious expression. It was locked up so tight no one else would have. I almost didn't make it through. We nearly had to try a full confrontation, or I was ready to blow the place up. It wouldn't have been me though. Chakra to use explosive tags was a direct burst. I carried plenty. Chakra to set and then trigger? Nope. Guy would have had to, and I wasn't sure he was capable of it as he focused almost entirely on taijutsu. It would have been a disaster. No problems returning? Ibiki was frowning down at his notes, no doubt on where Guy had carried me. It was so sweet when he worried. Sweet in a Ibiki tended to cause medic needing more work later on way. True love with this little pack involved blood and threats. None. I was exhausted from going fully ghost, but kept it up to outside the village, just having dropped to stage 1 in order to confirm with Crane. We took breaks, but he did most the running except when we fought in a few locations. Most was crossing with other shinobi, passing through Kiri territory as well. IWA, twice. Kyumo, once. Several groups of lesser rogues estimated by Crane to be genin and chunin who abandoned. We just helped out their villages by ending them. No scrolls or items of value save for restocking kunai and wire was obtained. All in all, it had been a boring trip back. And after? Inoichi was sipping his tea now. They'd of course picked up on my being twitchy about something this week, and it was clearly not from the mission. Well, seeing Guy strangle someone with a blue men's thong could make most twitchy, but yeah. You got a weird sense of humor when your honorary elder brothers were these two. I pouted. 2 eyebrows went up. I rarely pouted, but sometimes I just couldn't think of another way to show my irritation. I have a stalker. Oh, and the killing intent, hey, you have to love elder brothers. Especially sadistic and fanatical ones. Toying with them, well, can you blame me? They taught me. He's even figured out where I live, my favorite haunts. Oh, and the intent got palpable. See, one thing with our close relationship is because my instincts call them packmates, their killing intent is actually comfortable to me. Kind of how they always have to hide smiles when I growl if they've been talking about a bad day. Apparently a little sister growling out maiming threats is endearing to them. Did I mention shinobi are pretty screwed up? I let it linger for another minute before, true to again how they taught me, twisting it somewhere unexpected. The little Gaki seems to want to follow me everywhere. He's a damn puppy. Cue silence. Gaki? It was Inoichi's stare that made me stop the game. You always call them vermin. The playing dropped, and I nodded at him, completely serious. There's a reason I was bringing this up here and now rather than when visiting off duty. Uzumaki Naruto. You could practically hear the chakras circulating in the 3 of us. It got so quiet. We all knew the truth, of course. We also knew the laws. This was major. Anbu followed Naruto to keep him alive. Anbu that would now be in proxy following me. The secret that had to hide in plain sight. My coming and going would be watched if this continued. Also, there was no way to guess how things would go. Ibiki clenched his fist and nodded. He'd bring it up to the Hokage. Wait here. Inoichi and I were left alone, with a pot of tea and a silence that stretched between us. I made a faint chuffing sound and Inoichi moved his chair over to me, wrapping an arm around me as my nose went to the hollow of his throat. I loved my packmate's scent. It was crisp and cold, like metal. Sterile. Clinical. Clean. Ibiki's was more like iron just heated. I decided to lighten the mood. How's little Ino-chan? Inoichi chuckled, then began telling me stories of his little girl. He hadn't been in a serious relationship with Ino's mother, but they wed anyways. He was still out looking for women because it was more of an arrangement he had with the kunoichi. As long as Ino was well taken care of and she was discreet, and used contraceptives, Inoichi didn't begrudge his wife the same. Relationships in shinobi lives tended to be either rather open, or fiercely closed. There was almost never any in between. Even seduction missions were serious and focused, and no one really did them for pleasure. We didn't have friends, we had allies and those of fellow rank, or you had teammates you'd die for. It was why Inuzuka did so well as shinobi. We were bred for loyalty, and Noichi was one of those in an open arrangement. Ibiki had an understanding with a few kunoichi when his blood was up or if one of his lovers came back from a mission that they needed to de-stress from. I had other outlets. Inuzuka loyalty combined with my keeping my not quite shinobi status a secret. There was also that I was more a Kiryu than Inuzuka, wolf than dog. I didn't do casual. Which was probably a good thing because I had an absolute thing for men my brothers didn't approve of. Luckily they were all shinobi and thus due to my ongoing secret status, off limits. And good body or not there was no way in the 9 hells of Ibiki's creative sadistic mind I was going after Guy. Just no, my attention returned to hearing about little bossy Ino-chan and her mispronunciation of flowers. I actually rather liked Ino's mother, and Ibiki and I figured eventually the little arrangement would blossom into a genuine love between her and Inoichi. Not yet though, they were still needing a break from each other, and Ibiki and I were just amused at how Inoichi's tastes had started to mimic his wife's appearance. Now, I had actually managed to get caught up on my little pseudo-niece's tales by the time Ibiki returned. He wasn't alone. We had a guard. My nose recognized the Sumbu as one of Hokage's personal guard. No one said anything, we just followed Ibiki, the guard flanking us. My curious nature was up. Luckily since my interaction with Naruto had been witnessed no doubt as cool but civil I wasn't in trouble, which made me puzzled why there was a heavy feeling of dread I could scent off Ibiki. Ibiki knew what was coming and he disliked it. Whatever it was, whatever the outcome, he didn't like it at all. I blinked once, twice and visibly forced myself to relax. Ibiki and Inoichi had trained me well. If Ibiki was dreading but resigned to this, then it was out of all of our hands. Instead it would belong to the god of shinobi for our little village. The Hokage did not dismiss his Umbu, nor my brothers. Instead he paused and gave me a long measuring look. I stood. I bowed of course, I am wild but not uncouth. I did not sit however, I was under no illusions. Whatever he had to say would be either an obvious order or an implied one. I may be technically a civilian, but I am also a shinobi. I am one of his pawns, his soldiers. I would obey. Ikiryo, you seem to have by accident created a situation that is ideal. The Hokage took a draw on his pipe before he nodded. Every inch right now was not a kind grandfather, or the prior Hokage. This was the professor. The Hokage who would not let his aging body wear on his exceptionally powerful mind and was my commander, the will of fire made flesh. You are aware of course, of Uzumaki's nature. He is treated deplorably by the village. There was a pause, I nodded. The entire village, despite my orders, shuns him. Despite the nature of what he does for us, and has done. No doubt in the future will do. I can command shinobi, but I cannot command the civilians, not truly. Sarutobi took another breath and then eyed me. You are neither. What I want you to do, as your mission is subtle. It will be harsh, and only those present now in this room will be made aware. My one Umbu captain of my guards will filter the reports made by the other Umbu. I want you to find ways to intervene, Ikiryo. As a civilian, I am leaving the details up to you, but I am making this an A-class mission. None are to learn, none are to find out. I paused, everyone waited. The Hokage gave me a great deal of leeway when I thought things through, he always had. Because of my twisted status, and my more twisted packmates, I could sometimes think of things differently. I request Hokage-sama that you do not provide me with further information. I felt my lips quirk at the strangely painful attention from Sarutobi. His full attention was like a scalpel. I am a civilian, I would not know things about his day-to-day life. I need to stumble, I need to blunder and find out on my own. It will not be easy, I shrugged. I was terrified of what the brat held in him. This was normal, this was honest. But in the future, someday, because something like this may very well blow up when he learns, I want to be able to say that I was just asked to look out for him but not how. I will do this as I always do. Genuinely. My eyes met with my liege, my alpha in my mind. I did not look away. This was going to be hard. It was going to cause me severe backlash, but I was a civilian of Konoha, and despite all they thought they knew, the true shinobi knew nothing of how life beyond their world of shadows was. Nothing. The same way I had to teach them to blend on missions, was the same way they didn't know as I did, that not the entire village hated the Orange Menace. Deeper in town, away from the shinobi-frequented districts, people didn't like the ninja. You didn't mingle there. The civilians who didn't have family or lovers in the ninja corps didn't know about Naruto. The average civilian hated ninja. People didn't trust them for Konoha despite whatever the ninja thought, was heavily divided. The ninja looked down on the civilians, they thought nothing of them save as servants of sort, a lesser class. The civilians resented the shinobi as much as they liked the protection and were impressed by them. I was of either world. The civilians saw my failure to become, my being a part of but separate from my clan as being like them. I was thought to have come to my senses among them, and I did just fine business. I shopped from stores that the civilians did, I helped out in a few part-time jobs. I was average and normal. I wasn't, aside from my coloration, different. Or rather, the civilians treated me as if I had been terminally ill but recovered, would always bear the wounds but lived beyond. They saw me as odd, but it was the Anure-san has weird hobbies sort of way. They saw ninja as being heartless and often overbearing warlords. It was why they liked making them do D-rank jobs for pay. Sometimes, demeaning kid ninjas was all they could do to feel better. To the shinobi, I was a failure. Outside of this room, Guy, and only a handful of others who had mostly died in the years since Kyubi, I was looked upon as less than. I was a silly little wannabe who failed and now was a charity case to her cousins. Despite that, the Inuzuka adored me and I never asked for anything since my own space to build my home, which was considered a clan right. They knew of my chakra, but since I never used it, really didn't think on it. Out of sight and all that. To the shinobi at large, I was an amusement to Ibiki and Inoichi. The number of sordid rumors over the years had only grown. That I came and went from TNI and the Hokage Tower was easily brushed off. Those who didn't graduate were kept tabs on after all. This would be a hard mission, and a huge part of me was balking at the idea of being around the QB container. Yet V, ever since the mission was spoken, had been clamoring. My every instinct from that life that I no longer had was insisting this was hugely important. I just knew this was bigger than I realized, probably more so than even my Hokage did. So, mission pain in the ass begins now? I grinned a fanged Inuzuka smirk, just because I could. The Hokage didn't even blink as he nodded, but Inoichi and Ibiki stifling their snorting laughter was reward enough. Come to think of it, so was the sheer scent of shock and disbelief at my cheek from the umbu. Ha! That's what you get for wearing a cat mask, damn cats. In hindsight, had I let Satobi set everything up, I probably would have been adopting Uzumaki from the orphanage and getting paid for it. I was really glad as I walked out, alone, that I insisted on doing it my way. Children were evil little vermin, and any that were likely to be ninja had uncanny senses for when they were being played. This would be awkward and hard and likely annoying as all get out, but in the end I would stumble my way through it, and when someday the little demon container learned about the truth, I hoped he would let me live. You never knew. I didn't, truly, think he would kill me. Perhaps a blessing I had over many of my shinobi acquaintances, but I did feel he would find some way to express his disappointment if ever Uzumaki thought whatever was to come of my mission had been solely done on the whims of an old man. As well-meaning as they were. Instead, I had no guidance, no help. I was completely on my own with the parameters so vague I could essentially just make sure the kid had clothing for the academy, or the rare dango, and it would be considered a success. Ikirio are loyal though. Instead I found my way to the park. It faded into the woods that would run through the Nara compound and beyond, to the Inuzuka territories. It was a tiny patch of civilization amongst the wilds, and a bench that allowed me to see one of the many small streams that bloomed into a koi pond was my favorite spot. Stretching my legs, I leaned back and just watched, the scaled beauty of the koi letting my mind slip into a curious well now what mantra. Meditation was a huge part of shinobi life, and for those of us with our instincts making us strange to other humans, Inuzuka and Aburame both sought stillness. It wasn't a lack of thought, but rather stepping back to observe. Sometimes, it was in the detached now of thought that was so natural to the beasts and beasties of the wild that would let us find where to tackle a problem. Breathe in. What to do? Where to begin? What do I know about the little scamp? Disregarding the usual stats of demon container, family name, orphan. He likes the color orange. He enjoys ramen. He's actually pretty tenacious and quiet when stalking someone. He's too small. I'm pretty sure the Uzumaki brat is supposed to be 5 now, but he looks 4. For a ninja whelp, that is. Those with only civilian parents tend to a more steady aging process, whereas something about larger chakra reserves both accelerates growth and seems to retard it after a bit. A ninja child at 7 can be fighting already better than a non-trained civilian 2 or 3 times that age. So, he's young, too young considering his appearance to not have a bit more to him. He's an orphan. No one has adopted him because ninja are prejudiced and crazy. He's probably in the shinobi orphanage instead of the civilian one, so Sarutobi can keep watch over him. That means either it's shinobi run, or shinobi family. Either way, the ones in charge of him will have a grudge for his part in the Yandame's ploy, so he doesn't get fed as well, or trained. They probably aren't worried about his education. I have nothing else to work with. Breathe out. Scent. Ozone, sulfur, musk just under paint and ramen spices. My nose twists in an almost sneeze and I open my eyes, combing slowly through the visuals around me. A splash of orange not too far away. I lift my hand in greeting. It's lazy, a limp curl to my fingers. I don't really want to do. Gaki could have fled, could have stayed put, but instead he was suddenly right there. Note to self. Uzumaki is capable of impressive speed, and big blue puppy eyes lock onto me as my hand lowers. I hear crickets. If not for their lack of humor, I'd think there was an Aburame nearby to poke fun at me. I'm not always good at being serious. I don't like what I have been asked to do, but I'm loyal and I know I'll do this to the best of my abilities. My lips twitch into the usual Fong poking out smile. So, what's the name of my little stalker? Okay, the kid is seriously adorable as his eyes go wide, and then I wait. watching the nearly visible turning of gears in his head as Uzumaki realizes never once did he give his name. I'm Uzumaki Naruto. It comes out stiff, nervous. As if his name has gotten him bad reactions in the past. Before the first few run-ins, I don't doubt I'd be among the ones shunning him. Not aggressive or hateful, I respected the yondaime, and I respect the horrid role the brat plays for us. I'd have just ignored him. I'm more canine than not, and if we can't eat it, mark it, or hump it so to speak, we don't care, as the joke goes. Uzumaki never was important to me before. He wasn't an assignment, so he was just another face. I would have passed right by. Still, the way he says his name at just 4 years old rubs my non-existent fur the wrong way. I'm a sarcastic brat, so sue me. I grinned teasingly at him. You sure of that? You're not a Tomoki Namuko? Yeah, that was just a mumbled garbled mess, but there's something about this kid's introduction that felt off. He puffs out his cheeks in indignation and is a funny pink color, slowly turning blue from holding his breath before he nods fiercely. I'm Uzumaki Naruto. Databeo. Huh. V is both thrilled and utterly annoyed, I think. I shove the person I once was away and tilt my head at him, highly amused. Gaki has spirit. Good. Spirit I can work with, Ikirio Anrei. I smirk at the pipsqueak as he blinks rapidly. We are both watching, waiting. I don't want to rush him. I'm a wolf, I can wait. Maybe my Inuzuka cousins would be more brash and go straight in, but I want the little demon container to give me an idea of what it is he needs. Had I ears like a dog, I'm certain they'd be swiveled forwards, fully attending to Naruto even as I seem lazily just blinking at him. He blinks at me. I get the feeling I'm being analyzed. I wait. He fidgets and looks around a bit. His outfit is too big on him, the sleeves rolled up and dirty. His hair is unkempt and long, not in a style either but just scraggly. I do not know what it is someone else would think seeing this little boy as he is. To me, however, and I'm certain to my cousins, I see grit. Only strong pups make it naturally, and though he's lean and filthy, it's the sort of desperate lean that occurs in the wild. He's determined. This child has a core of steel, if he can be properly tended to. Patience, though, is clearly not something he has. Naruto opens and closes his mouth several times. He looks away, fidgets, looks back. He wants something. Very clearly he wants something, but I do not imagine the village has been good to him. I can honestly say, aside from rumors, I've not paid the Gaki any mind all these years. Whatever he meant to say is drowned out by the roaring of his far too empty stomach. He flushes a deep red, looking down ashamed and clearly about to bolt away. I'm given only seconds to decide. He's a hungry kid, but I've no doubt he's unwelcome in most locations this part of town that sell food. More, I do not want to become his meal ticket. Habits form swiftly after all. Instead I chuckle and shrug, my eyes never leaving his bright orange form. When did you eat last? Naruto blushes. He pales, and shifts and fidgets, so I amend the question. Remind me to teach the kid to lie. The last time you ate a proper meal, not stolen bits here and there. He clams up and I shrug. Perhaps he needs a reminder of where we live. What? I'm curious who you took things from, because depending on the target, that's a promising bit of skill. Well, dang. Didn't anyone ever explain the darker stuff the shinobi do? Naruto's gaping in honest amazement. Come on, kid, seriously? There's whole classes taught to shinobi so they learn how to be good at stealing things. No! Naruto is gaping now, not in outrage but sheer disbelief. It makes me uncomfortable. Even my bratty little nephew and niece 4 times removed or something, Hana and Kiba, know that ninjas steal, kill, and disable. It sets my instincts off. Maybe in his own way this is a form of aggression from the trouble-making villagers. If so, it is a very worrying precedent. Ah, screw it. When in doubt, follow your instincts is practically a clan motto anyways. Come on, brat. You can tell me what you actually know about shinobi, and show me how good you are at stealing food off my plate. Before he can react, I have him thrown over my shoulder, heading deeper into civilian territory for my favorite yakisoba haunt. The Gaki is so startled he doesn't even squirm at first. Where are you? He sounds so scared it almost makes me growl. He's limp in my hold, but I feel it trembling. Brave little brat, what have you been through? I can let you walk if you want, but my legs are longer. I'm hungry. Ever had yakisoba? It won't be easy to sneak off my plate because Yano noodles. I start to ramble, feeling him relax a little even as he's puzzled. I've completely thrown him off. And the vegetables are always nice and saucy, not too much though. They do a great beef one, but I like the tofu. Lots of places make it taste weird, but it's good here and soft. I like to eat my meat separately so I can enjoy it better. I keep rambling. Uzumaki is silent. I can feel his entire focus on what I'm saying. Probably the longest someone has talked to him before. I keep rambling about food, because he's hungry, probably starving, and it has his attention for me. I start to discuss tea and why I prefer jasmine, though I love green tea too, and white, and oolong. I like to drink them plain and unsweetened, but I huff that someone always loves to sweeten my jasmine tea. I leave out that the sweetener is Ibiki's poison of choice for the day. By the time I've made it to the little hole in the wall restaurant, Uzumaki is on my hip. He's holding on to my jacket comfortably, his eyes wide and occasionally giggling. He seems like a limpet, snuggled into my side in a way that honestly I'm not so happy about, but the kid is 4 or 5 and too small and acts like he never gets positive interaction. I allow it. We step inside and he cringes in my hold, tiny as he can make himself when the other diners and staff look over. I ignore them and take him to the restroom to wash my hands. It doesn't even occur to me someone hasn't taught him how. He just stares as I hoist him up, used to doing so for the many Inuzuka brats I sometimes watch. It's just sad. You saw what I did, yeah? Naruto nods and I smirk at him. Good observation, prove it. Do just what I did. Aside from using cold water, he does. It's sloppy, but it works. I want to take the cloth he dries his hands with to his face, but I think I've overwhelmed him enough already. He does manage to pipe up the dreaded why, and I just shrug. Food tastes better when you don't have dirt on it. Thank the moon, he just nods and accepts it. When I tried explaining that to Kiba, he took to dumping dirt on his food to test it out. For a week. Some tried to ambush me for a month in revenge. It was pretty funny. You do want to be a shinobi, yeah? He nods, eyes serious, and I shrug. Well, you did well seeing how I washed up. Tell you what, try to copy what I do at the table and I'll get you your own yakisoba. We can see how good a sneak you are another time. Observation is one of the most important skills after all. He's so quiet, so serious. Someone else would mistake the fidgeting as energy. I don't doubt he has it, but it's more his focus is so strong it's blocking him out to other things. He needs an outlet before he becomes destructive. That's what Ibiki always said. Who knows what could have come of him in the following years otherwise. I get a nudge from V, who seems far more awake with the little demon container around. It wouldn't be good. It wouldn't be bad, but it would do the kid no favors. So alright. Give him something to focus on. I've got an idea starting, but I need to see how well he takes direction with this. If so, well, I may have found something that will make Sarutobi so happy he'll eat his hat. What's with all this? Naruto is confused as we sit down. The chopsticks and napkins and teacups seem unfamiliar to him. Luckily, he holds the chopsticks enough. Someone, probably Sarutobi, taught him. It's a blessing I'm grateful for. Well, you're getting what I get, Gaki. I smirk and pour him tea before mine. Let it cool or it will hurt. After the first sip, if it's too bitter, I'll sweeten it, but try it. I wait for him to watch me as I sip it, making a show of how to hold the tea mug and sipping it slowly. I blow on it first, even though that's not normal for me, just to teach him to be careful. He does it exactly as I did. Exactly. I feel a frisson up my spine as he even sets the cup down like I did. There's a suspicion. This could be a natural talent, it could be priceless. When our rice and miso shows first, wanting to put something in his stomach and get him familiar with cheap things to get, he does it again. He's clumsy with his chopsticks, but every bite, the way I hold my bowl, even as I test him by plucking out bits of seaweed from my miso to nibble on before sipping, he does it like my little mirror. Oh sure, he's slower and it's after me, but he's observant. He's relaxing too as the warm food and tea settles into him. I can see how hard it is for him to not just gobble down the food before it's taken away from him, and so I chuckle softly and smile. You're doing amazingly well, Uzumaki. Very much so. If you can keep this up through the meal, I'll teach you something else. The praise soaks into him and I'm treated to a foxy grin from him that should worry me, for what is in his system, but there's such joy and warmth in his smile. I find myself returning it. The kid has a gift in his happiness alone, it seems. I settle into small interrogation questions that pass as conversation as we eat. I can't finish my rice, not wanting to fill up before my yakisoba, so I pass it to Naruto. That seems to relax him even more, realizing he'll definitely get enough to eat. Ibiki did train me well. What made you want to be a shinobi? The Hokage GG. I stifle a giggle and he blushes but beams at my reaction and continues he would stop by and tell me in the other kids' stories his speech is not as clear as what I filter into my brain. He's uneducated, course. He clips his words and sounds almost stupid. Lots of them were about the shinobi and the cool things they can do, and I want to be noticed. Everyone knows who the Hokage is. I hum and nod. He's young, he hasn't gone to the conclusion I feel someday he will of the Hokage is the best known, so I want to be him. He's pliable still. Well, that's all true. Are you going to the academy? Yeah. I start this next session and Hokage GG enrolled me himself. Have you read the starting books then? What? Oh dear. We blink at each other a bit, and I sigh. There's books, you're supposed to read them before the classes start. It gets into what you will be learning, and what to study at home. Naruto hunches into himself, and toys with a frayed sleeve. I see. The shops didn't tell him, and probably wouldn't even sell them to him. This is something I can't solve by taking him around the civilians' part of town, as they were specifically shinobi texts. Well, it may take me a few days, but I think I have some older ones. They may be outdated, but... I really? Naruto's voice is so shaken, his eyes so very blue, and I know Ibiki would kill to work the puppy eyes like that. Not that he can. Trust me, Inoichi and I still remember when he tried and terrified an entire squad. I nod to him with a smile. Hey, they're just sitting in storage. Why not? We're distracted when our food comes and Naruto nearly lights up the place with how much he's smiling when not eating. This I can do. I can work with him on small skills, make sure he has his materials. Never has to get more personal than this. Ikiryo is awesome, I'm doomed aren't I? I'd gotten used to having a little stalker. It was a few months after my first assignment, and Naruto seemed to always be able to find me. I'd taken him out to eat a few more times, but mostly I had used a few idle comments to get him to look into things. Nothing too wild, I mean he was a little boy after all. There's only so intelligent a boy at his age can be. I still haven't any idea if he's 4 or 5, but outside of civilians' rumors no child is that developed so young. Certainly, the expanded chakra of those with shinobi potential makes itself known, but the tales of kids under 10 graduating and holding advanced positions is really laughable. Oh, certainly, those with chakra can do a great deal, but your coils are still growing along with your body. Smart kids graduate on average at 12 but then spend a year or two after doing D-rank missions. Then climb to C and Chunin is slow and takes a great deal of advancement. Most people never bother leaving Genin, the advancement later on is specifically for their field. Clerical jobs in the ninja world can be started fresh out of school. For those who do not pass into 3-man cells, it's straight into desk work usually. Or if one is fortunate, an apprenticeship. Ibiki and Inoichi both graduated at 12, and that's considering both messed around. I technically failed, but passed in secret at 13 and began training under the Hokage's direction. The better control of one's chakra comes after puberty starts, and I was a bit late. Mostly when I worked with Naruto now it was hinting to him that he should have a stipend to spend on small things, what the orphanage should be providing him with. I let him figure out who to approach and what to say. I then started teaching him what fair prices were for certain things. I was also helping him with the books I had promised. It turned out no one had yet started to teach the boy his letters or numbers, and with a bit of tricky work I had him concurrently attending the civilians' lessons in the afternoons. He was going to ninja classes, and since I'd already started in on what certain terms meant and making certain he wasn't going to embarrass himself, he was adapting just fine. I'd known he didn't like the idea of extra school at first, but he'd gone the first day just for me and a bribe of ramen from a stand that was fairly popular, and didn't mind him. That had been a very expensive trip. All it had taken was seeing how much of the academy work was theory and written, which he didn't know. That and being just another kid in the civilian school that had been instructed to not fight or hit. I think it was the secondary class, the fact that kids were talking to him and about at his comprehension level as they did not have the chakra-enhanced growth. This had been a huge change. He'd been adorably excited when after the first week in the cleaning of the classroom exercises a number of the kids claimed he was the best at cleaning the erasers. I guess he'd figured out a way to do it that was dramatic and messy but amusing, not to mention the gaki soaked up praise. Seriously, he tracked me down to the grocery store just to tell me how awesome he was at cleaning blackboard erasers. I kept working on his manners as much as a clan affiliated with dogs as mine cared for them. If he could mimic me, then he got to eat out sometimes and try new foods. I was teaching him how to address people and control his volume so that he didn't sound either uncertain or boorish. I'd use practice lessons for him to see the evidence himself, challenging him to address people in one way and report back how they had responded. The kid was a natural. He should have been Inuzuka. He was direct, bluntly honest, brash and entertaining but also smart. One of the days he was visiting me though he blurted out something regarding when I could teach him a cool jutsu. Sorry Naruto, yeah, the gaki had demanded we were on first name basis. It was cute, in an overbearing way. He had worn me down though and I just yielded to it at this point. I didn't become a shinobi, but I mean wait, don't start a sentence with but. I didn't actually care, yet my mother had drilled that into me so often it came out of me as a habit. I was weeding my garden at the moment, while the gaki perched nearby just watching me. It's alright, I know I told you I went to the academy but I didn't pass like everyone else, yes, a little misdirection there pipsqueak, don't ever catch on. So while I went for the usual 8 years not a prodigy, or anything, I never passed the standard exam jutsus. I am one of many who didn't, and so I have my odd little hobbies to make money from. I looked up through my lashes at the most adorable face full of pity for me. I'm thinking I need to talk to Ibiki and Inoichi about this kid, his cuteness could be a weapon. He's slowly making me actually like him. Oh, he still terrifies me for what he carries inside, but the carrier himself is a pretty darn sweet kid with a loyal streak only an Inuzuka or a Kiryu could match. You would be such a cool shinobi though. Naruto is pouting at me now, and it's all I can do not to smile as he pauses, gathering his thoughts. I'm proud he's come this far in so short a time. Really, it's not even been half a year and the little sponge that he is just soaks up everything. So it doesn't upset you, I mean me, and he trails off and fidgets nervously. He's trying to think of a polite way to say his next words, but he is just a kid and I know he'll end up taking the rip the bandage off approach soon enough. That's fine, again, it's how my clan is and I like that about him. I mean, when I graduate and become a super strong ninja and Hokage, and I don't want to make you sad. I pause and look at him, seriously look at him. His hands are dirty from trying to help, but he did pull the wrong plants out. His eyes are so serious and blue, and that may even be a few tears trying to sneak out. His clothing is still in bad shape, but I've not started on that one yet. He has his hair actually cut shorter and layered a bit so the spikes are more even. I managed to convince him to let me tidy his hair for school and took him to his first barbershop. Predictably, The civilian old man spoiled Naruto rotten for being so well behaved about it, and even promised to color the tips a big trend with the civilian kids right now if he got high grades on his next report cards. Plural. The civilians I had introduced him to were, I think, hoping he'd come to his senses like I supposedly had, and were completely behind my having him go to regular school. My father had made me do the same, and tutored me at home, even though my mother hadn't understood why the regular ninja schooling and clan teachings weren't enough. My lips pulled into that fond-showing smile then, and I wiped my hands off before going to crouch in front of the demon container. I didn't initiate contact often. Scooping him up to throw over my shoulder was hardly affectionate, and I would allow him to hug my legs when he'd first find me, but otherwise it was rare I'd pat his shoulder or head. That required something special. It wasn't my being cruel, it was the fact that such touch imparted pack and pack was so serious to me. Even my practically nephew Kiba didn't get cuddled or anything. It wasn't our way. Uzumaki Naruto, I waited until his eyes met mine before I set my hands on his shoulders, feeling his whole body shudder. Poor kid craved contact, and I just couldn't hand it out without meaning it. I wouldn't do that to him. I wouldn't lie. Any and everything up to this point was because he startled it out of me or I wanted to do it. I would keep it in that exact fashion. If you became the strongest shinobi ever, and did it for the right reasons, I'd be glad to say I knew you when you couldn't even tell a weed from a vegetable. I meant it too. Naruto half closed his eyes, leaning into my hands on his shoulders, and I let him. I didn't pull my hands away, but I didn't pull him closer either. I could tell he didn't wish to close his eyes, as if he was memorizing this moment. Thanks, Anrue. Naruto gave one of his rare tiny shy smiles, the ones that didn't scream infectious joy but instead made me feel I was very lucky. I wasn't sure why. So you aren't a shinobi? Are you just really bad? I chuckled at how far off the mark he was and grinned. Look underneath kiddo, I'm just very special, I guess. But the benefit is, since I did my years in the academy, I can help you out. Hey, will you teach me how to throw kunai? I mean, when it's time. He already knew I wouldn't teach anything ahead that would get him used to violence because of the other school he went to. Instead, I paused and tilted my head in thought. I had learned katas that used an opponent's motions against them to calm and stretch my body at his age. He may be able to handle some of them. I nodded my head though, rather than a verbal response. Naruto didn't move. I wouldn't be the first to pull away. I wouldn't draw him closer, and he had very good instincts. Perhaps the only good thing he gained from the fox in his belly. Naruto simply seemed to have picked up on my lack of physical contact with others and thankfully realized it wasn't just him. Rather, compared to even the other villagers I would interact with and their own little spawns, Naruto got more from me already. I'd fully never intended to let him even do that. Sometimes, it was only remembering that no matter the monstrous creature within him, this was just a tiny child. A strong-willed, worthy little pup. My instincts were able to scent and sense what he carried. A lingering from being able to ghost in my chakra-based jutsus meant I was hypersensitive to spiritual chakra. His very scent to me had the burning scent from the Kyuubi's attack in my memories. Those same instincts still kept me from being distant. The kid has seriously adorable puppy eyes. My body probably would have felt like it was numbing at this point if not for all the training in my past, and I could only imagine Naruto's legs had fallen asleep. He still didn't move, and I closed my eyes with a sigh. My instincts were at war. Not yet though. I wouldn't pull him close yet. My Akirio's side though acknowledged that it was plausible if things kept up, I would start to see Naruto as a packmate. I knew if that day came I would have to approach the Hokage again, and it wouldn't go well. Slowly I removed my hands and stood, looking down at the dejected form though was hard. Demon container. Container. Jailer. Just a little kid, damn it. Come on, let's go into the back. At your age, my father had me doing a few basic stretches that help build up muscle. When you're fidgety, they're fantastic. I turned and didn't wait for him. I knew he'd follow. Sure enough, the patter of his feet still walked too heavy and needed to learn to be quiet, but the academy could handle that aspect of his training. He always slowed as we went through my house, as if he couldn't get enough of seeing everything. It wasn't much. I had comfortable furniture in dark grays and black with the random colorful throw pillow. Inoichi liked to get ones that said really sarcastic sayings for me. I had one from Ibiki that was an atomically correct red heart. He had it in black. Some people got friendship bracelets. We got creepy heart pillows. Inoichi had one in blue, but apparently little Ino-chan had decided it was hers. It seemed fitting Ino had her daddy's heart. My floor was wood. Part of me kept fluttering in hope I'd have my own neendog someday, so much of my decor reflected this. There was no rug. I liked the feeling of wood floors, either sun-warmed or chilled under bare feet. I did have a lot of fluffy fur blankets all over, but I liked curling up in those. My walls were cream. Plants climbed over bookshelves and sat in windows. Hardy ones that were hard to kill. I had books and scrolls stuffed in a number of areas. An entire wall floor to ceiling was just for them, but the overflow was rather massive. There were pictures on the walls of various people. Plenty were paintings I had done over the years. Many of them would never make sense to anyone else as it was pure imagination. I kept the ones from things we had shared in the early days safely locked away. I couldn't have explained the pictures that were my best attempt to remember V's life as her memories had faded. These would likely never be seen, and I could never explain the people or items in them anyways. It had been the last thing I did before V faded to more a sense of things. I guess it was closure. My favorite color is blue. It's followed by any shade of green found in nature, and the soothing shades of blacks and grays. I like natural wood furniture and flooring, and it's obvious in my home. As we passed the wall of photos that showcased my own academy days, and didn't Inoichi look silly back then, and Ibiki had a full head of hair into the kitchen, I pretended to not see Naruto swipe a pear from my fruit bowl. He was getting better at it, to his credit. So the point of these stretches I'm going to teach you will make you more flexible. It'll strengthen your muscles at the same time, and when you start learning the academy fighting style should let you be less awkward. It'll feel really silly and off to begin with though. I can do it! Naruto was nodding adamantly, and it made me chuckle. Have to say, he doesn't do anything by halves. Slowly I started teaching him the most obvious of stretches. Toe touches, ones for his hamstrings and calves. I taught him a few twists, and then taught him how to do a sit-up. As the days would go on, and he'd come insisting he needed something new, balancing poses started to be incorporated. Those he had great fun with, as I reminded him it was every day you practiced because each day impacted the next on your body. He was insanely flexible. It had taken me months when my father taught me to do half the twists and forms that Naruto could. He had trouble holding them though, and so we got in the game of seeing if he could hold a pose the entire time I did a small chore. We'd discuss the questions he had on both ninja and non-ninja schooling. We'd make up rhymes to challenge his word association. The Gaki was fitting himself into my life as though he had always been there. It completely terrified me how naturally it was happening too. The first time Ibiki brought it up, I was sprawled on his insanely comfortable couch with my head in his lap and my hands toying with Inoichi's fingers as his head rested on my stomach. Inoichi managed to do that without crushing me by leaning back while he sat on a cushion on the floor. Really, I'd gotten my packmates so used to physical contact with me that when alone we were just a puppy pile. Come to think of it, back in the day before Ibiki's traps upgraded to lethal even for those trying to spy in the windows, this behavior probably spawned a lot of those rumors about us. You never mentioned Uzumaki. Ibiki's tone was even, but I could read my heart, brother. He was upset. We didn't leave anything out if we had a choice. By necessity, I didn't know any of their TNI work really. Well, not officially, though I could put a lot together just from knowing them. I lifted my chin to stare up at Ibiki. His eyes locked onto mine and I blinked several times. He was worried for me. I know it's going well. I read the report before it's destroyed. The Hokage allows me that. But it doesn't say anything about how you feel. Someone else might be startled to hear Ibiki talk feelings. But it's precisely because he can care so much that he can know how to tear others apart. Inoichi hums softly at my abdomen, agreeing silently. In the last few months, aside from the few snippets of information, I suppose I have not brought up the little Gaki. I sigh slowly, breathing in their scent to organize my thoughts. I suppose because here I can forget. Inoichi chuckles then, and I feel his smile against my bare abdomen. It's a hot night out, and while they are both shirtless, I'm just in a loose tank top. We're shinobi, they're practically immune to seeing bodies at this point, and as far as I am concerned they are my pack. They could be naked and it wouldn't matter, but I'm still glad they aren't. They are my brothers after all. It's nice to know we're still the most important in your life. Seeing as we haven't gotten invited over since your mission started. He likes staking out my house. A lot. Really, if he ever figures out how to get past the traps in the guest room windows, I wouldn't be surprised if he forced his way in. Ibiki snorts at that. He'd been the one to install the traps after all. No one is getting in there unless I let them in the door from the hallways. Considering ninja, that's actually the last way they would think of entering. It's why sometimes you'll never see shinobi lock their doors, but the windows and air vents will be trapped to the point you couldn't body flicker in. Yet you'd just be able to push open the door and meander through. It seriously never occurs to most shinobi. Ever. Ibiki stays quiet a while before he speaks, and the very fact we are in his home and safe is probably the only reason he voices his thoughts. It feels like you are being stolen away by this mission. We don't see you as much. I flinch. It is nearly my exact words from when they graduated, leaving me behind. Inoichi was technically older by quite a few years, but the Yamanaka enrolled later than most. They had to develop their minds better. As an experiment, he also claimed to be younger on his academy paperwork, and no one ever figured it out. It's kind of amazing how people don't look at the obvious. With my two older and only friends gone, the last few years of the academy had been brutal for me. I'd whimpered, and I do mean whimpered, those words to them during their genin year. We figured it out, 3 determined souls as we are. Still, Ibiki and Inoichi are shinobi, and they are my pack. We are all 3 possessive, and they aren't enjoying the separation. Neither am I. I don't like it either. I turn slightly, one arm going around Ibiki's waist, my other being kept in Inoichi's hold. The Gaki is he deserves more than I'm doing. He really does. Yet I need you. Inoichi is the one who responds, his words tickling my stomach, but in typical fashion he is too lazy to move away and be heard more clearly. That, and he likes making me squirm. He could just talk telepathically, but sometimes his Nara teammate seems to have rubbed off in the lazy department. We can handle ourselves, Andre. Don't lose yourself in this mission. Underneath his meaning makes me go boneless in relief as Ibiki grunts in agreement. They're willing to work with this, they won't be hostile but they won't fake it either. They're protecting me again, my wonderful pack mates. It's a bond that just doesn't exist for most but Ibiki and Inoichi. They have no Ikiryo or Inuzuka blood but somehow Inoichi had been in my mind enough, and Ibiki's to share some of the instincts. We have truly at one point in our youth broken down all the barriers between us. They understand me as I understand them because we risked everything one mission. We don't speak of it, even our report to the Hokage was glossed over. Technically we endangered the mission. It was our fifth one out as a team and it went so terribly wrong. What we admitted to was finding a way around it, and coming out successful. The after effects was our close friendship had become where even before my Inuzuka cousins, my instincts recognized these two as my pack. They were a part of my heart in such a way no one ever would be again. It would have killed us to replicate it. So we resumed the slumber parties? Coming from Ibiki it just sounded so funny, sending me into giggles, but Ibiki did love to mess with your thoughts. Yes, Ibiki, we resumed the evenings. You'll have to lay off the poison though, I haven't taught him yet. He's just learning to steal things. 4 or 5 years old, you know? They didn't correct me on my lack of knowing his age. I didn't want data I didn't get on my own. It would complicate things. Right, numbing agents then. Inoichi chortled at Ibiki as I snickered. Should I bring Ino? Not yet. Let's make sure. Actually, I paused, then thinking. Remembered how desperate Naruto was for physical contact. Soon though, I think Ino and her hugs of doom may be just what he needs. Ibiki muttered softly, and they call me a sadist. Nothing prepared me for the betrayed kicked puppy expression on Naruto's face when he said I had company from where he found me in the grocery store the next day. He'd been coming to find me almost daily now, at least when he had school. I lifted a brow at the little gaki as I walked, bags dangling, and just waited. He was a kid, no matter whom, even the Hyuga and Uchiha children would blurt things out. Heck, even the Aburame brats did, though they almost always answered their own questions in the process. There's strange people in your home. Naruto looked like he was devastated. I had to pause a moment, and wonder just how often he was there when I wasn't, lurking nearby, that the idea of someone else being in my house brought him so much distress. Hopefully the little brat wasn't sleeping in my bushes or something. Describe them? Naruto stopped walking and just stared. I kept going. The kid was ridiculously talented. Seriously, the numerous ways he had potential was enough to make a grown woman like myself jealous. I wouldn't let my coveting his natural shinobi gifts stand in the way of encouraging them, however. I didn't want to risk his losing them. Losing natural talent early made it nearly impossible to reclaim it later on. It was something I'd always feel rise up over concerning the gaki. Well, Naruto? You know what I'm asking, yes? He slowly walked beside me, his months of my strange training making him wary but deep in thought. The fact I wasn't panicking was not understandable to him yet, but he was trying to figure it out. One was tall in a big coat and had a napkin on his head. His description of Ibiki caused me to snort in laughter, which set Naruto at ease. Seriously, the kid fed on attention and spit out happiness. Wondered if it was some strange bloodline trait. The other had really long blonde hair, lighter than mine. Up in a funny hairstyle. They were both inside though. Inside. Not hit by the traps either. Naruto had, of course, managed to get caught in all the traps at least once. I'd begged Ibiki to remove the lethal ones almost from the start, but it just made my sadistic packmate get creative, which was almost worse. That should be Marino Ibiki and Yamanaka Inoichi. They're friends from when I went to the academy who don't shun me for failing. A little truth in a lie, and Naruto bought it. His jaw dropped. They're shinobi? Those two? Good ones too. They're a bit weird though, like me. I chuckled at the understatement but grinned down at the boy. Really, if you can remember the things I've taught you even a little, you'll be fine, gaki. Naruto piped up then, his voice so tiny, so unsure that it tugged at my hearstrings. It was moments like this I forgot the burn and the sting of the fox scent under his own, the oily red chakra I could sense just out of range with my abilities. Just a little kid. A little pup. You wouldn't mind if I met your friends? Blast it. At this rate the brat was going to win me over, and unlike almost everyone else I could still smell/feel/sense the creature that was inside him. I still had nightmares of that night, and the devastation, and my father and I had been outside of Konoha proper for a camping trip. I looked down into watery blue eyes, hopeful, yet so afraid to be, hoping that it wouldn't just be my sudden laugh and a joke at his expense. With a soft sigh I just nodded. I was not going to deny my instincts, and they were starting to accept the little one. A faint snort and a grunt was his answer. It was Inuzuka talk, body language and canine sounds often instead of words, and I was falling into it out of discomfort. I must have been doing it more often, or the brat had frighteningly good instincts. Their two fox maybe had passed on something useful, because I swear he understood my noises and I had done them out of habit. He just fell into step after me and held out his arms for the lightest of the bags. Well, looks like my little tag-along was about to meet two of the more feared shinobi in the village. I hope Inoichi brought his camera. Gaffa Geffa watch. Turns out Inoichi did bring his camera. Ibiki brought the numbing agents because if he says something, believe he means it. After a few awkward moments with the three males in my life, though one wasn't exactly invited in, as I had started to lay out the snacks for the evening, Ibiki had started a prank war. Ibiki is always the one who starts it, the evil little shit. I may have completely forgotten to warn Naruto about the fact that while most girls had slumber parties with painting nails and doing hair, and maybe guys read magazines they shouldn't admit to and drank beer, my little pack had always just been crazy. Ibiki had snatched one of the teriyaki skewers, and while everyone else grabbed a few, I had thrown one to Naruto, who actually caught it, and was clearly stunned at the strange, whatever attitude that had taken over with him being there. We were just going to behave as normal and the gaki would be included. Trial by fire is kinda the Konoha way. So while we started to tussle over the many food items I had, Ibiki had of course spiked the drinks. I had gone to make tea, and Noichi and Ibiki had grabbed for those weird aloe clump juice waters that are flavored, and Naruto had copied them. I heard the laughter and came out with my mug of tea and sat down amused, watching a confused and cross-eyed Naruto stare at his tongue that was out while the other two laughed. Of course, they did not forget that Naruto was often the butt of cruel jokes, and so before the gaki could take it personally, I chuckled and grinned. Don't worry, Naruto, it's sort of Ibiki's way to try and kill us to keep us sharp. The fact he got the stuff in your drink just means you are one of us tonight. Just don't touch the alcohol and you're good. Thoiwan. I am pretty sure he shrieked poison there. Ibiki gave a smug HNGH sound and Inoichi was chortling. Seeing as I had the only working lips and tongue, I nodded. I promise it's none of it dangerous. Heck, come to think of it, pretty easy to get and distribute Ibiki? A nod. Yeah, he wasn't going to embarrass himself, so clearly he'd taken the substance too to help foster goodwill from the brat. I do love my evil mastermind packmate. Work on upping your strategy in ninja school and your history score in civilian class, and I'll let him teach you where to find the stuff to make that. Be good for pranks. Ish how he first just he shove. Inoichi said casually. Naruto of course fell into laughter hearing someone else talking so oddly. I rolled my eyes, smiling fondly, and settled in, being ever so careful to never let my cup within Ibiki pranking range. Seeing as for now at least, I'm the only one who can talk, what Inoichi means is that Ibiki first came up with the numbing agent in food as a prank in the academy. Managed to get it into all the staff and they talked weird for the day. Was a fantastic day of class for all the grades. They were a few years ahead of me, drawing attention to his actions for Naruto's sake, as the boy didn't have our eyes or senses unless Ibiki made a show of pulling out a vial and popping one of the chewable pills to reverse the effect. Naruto would have never noticed. He then held it out to Inoichi and grinned at Naruto. Well, seeing as Honore has claimed you've got talent, Ibiki made the vial vanish. You just have to convince me to give the antidote to you. Or wait 3 hours. That was where Naruto's garbled threat that he'd get revenge on Ibiki had started. Inoichi made eye contact with me and rolled his eyes. I just nodded to confirm the insanity that Naruto was getting himself into. Ibiki may be rather strict and by the code now, but in his youth, you know, back when he had short silver hair and not so traumatized, Ibiki had been a very feared prankster. Ruthless. It had even been a 4-foot scroll with tiny handwriting of his best pranks attached to his resume that had helped secure his current job. There was actually a clause in his contract that had stated he couldn't prank any superiors. Ibiki had argued the Hokage and the one he would be working under were the only exemptions. Apparently anyone else needed to be on their toes. Umbu hated Ibiki those first few years. Amazingly, it seemed that Naruto actually fit into our insanity. We ate. We shared stories where Inoichi, who had used his jutsu in front of an enthralled Naruto to force Ibiki to hand him over the antidote, but let Naruto know he was still on his own, and reminded him if he couldn't figure out how to beg or steal the substance the effects would be over in 3 hours, but we knew Ino-chan had him so wrapped around her finger he'd probably cave to the darker set of blue eyes soon anyways. Inoichi was catching me up on the regular ninja news. Shinobi gossip, for lack of a better term, all of it easily obtained to anyone with a headband or who was usually around other shinobi. Since I wasn't, and neither was Naruto, we got to hear everything from what idiotic new taxes were out, if there was a new weapons shop and the like. A slight tilt of Ibiki's head as Inoichi rambled on to Naruto about how a new genin didn't apply chakra correctly, and instead of bouncing from the rooftops landed through one and ended up in the hospital, and I blinked. Ibiki's dark eyes locked onto mine and there was that push-pull partoff-pack sensation that could flare up between the three of us. It wasn't a jutsu per se. It was a really screwed-up result of Ibiki's genjutsu backfiring into chakra exhaustion, my chakra abilities when I was ghosting and didn't have the energy to phase back correctly, and a half-delirious terrified Inoichi with a head injury. A long time ago. It was our biggest secret, not even the Hokage knew of this one, and I just tilted my head. Our eyes locked and I had a flicker of sensation and thoughts, and even the lingering tickle of the numbing agent around my lips before it passed. Just a few moments, but in that time we could pass so much to each other. Ibiki was pleased. I had the thought wasn't originally mine in that short time that Naruto hearing these sessions would only eventually lend credence to my being nothing special and just a civilian who stayed close to her shinobi friends. Of course Ibiki would like that, and I admit no child that's natural could keep such secrets. There was also the surprised interest that the little demon container was interesting rather than annoying, and contentment that the three of us were spending time together. There was also the smug never grew up delight Ibiki had in a new victim to prank, but it was part of why I loved my brother. I blinked my eyes several times to come back to myself fully, it wasn't easy and left us as vulnerable as shinobi were willing to get for a short time. Still, nothing ever improves without practice. I just chuckled and leaned over into Ibiki contently, humming once. It got really loud then with Naruto spluttering. Apparently the sight of my cuddling Ibiki had him convinced we were an item. He even held up his pinky finger with his face bright pink. Ibiki and I, of course, being so much older, had no idea what that meant until a laughing Inoichi explained it to us. Apparently Ino had subjected Inoichi to a very long lecture on exactly what this meant, and it boiled down to coupley stuff. I didn't even need to guess to know that Ibiki and I had the same wickedly amused smirk on our faces. "They're my pack, Naruto," I said softly. The adorable little Gaki didn't seem to get it, no one else really did. "My family? We aren't related by blood, but Inoichi and Ibiki are my brothers. We're pack." It was such a simple word for how tightly the three of us were bound. It was easier to say that the very sordid rumors about the three of us out there were impossible specifically because it would mean a lesser bond than what we had. Soulmates weren't always romantic. I chuckled then, seeing as Naruto was probably thinking normally about this, and I needed to stress it early to him, so he didn't get upset that I wouldn't be able to hear him claim me as pack in one of his hyper moods. It's a very serious permanent thing. The Inuzuka clan is my family, but they aren't part of my pack. Ino isn't either, not truly. She's just a little wolf pup and hasn't found a place. It doesn't mean she isn't loved. Ino is my daughter after all, and she's precious to me. Because of that though, she's precious to my sister and brother, Naruto. Inoichi was good with kids, unlike Ibiki and I, and he just smiled at the spluttering boy. There was such a sharpness to his focus right now, as if he was trying to figure out if he was being included or excluded. To his credit, so were we. I suppose Ibiki spoke slowly, evenly, decisively. You'd be more pack friend. An ally. New to the two of us as you are. Instinct had me turn and bite Ibiki on his ear with a growl. I knew my eyes would be sharp and cold, but my world narrowed. Inoichi pulled Naruto to his side, passing him the extra antidote tablet, not wanting the little boy to be scared as the sudden flare of killing intent, minor though it was from Ibiki, surfaced. Don't worry. Inoichi looked down at the darker blonde boy who had his blue eyes so wide, even as he crunched the tablet. Really don't? I'm sure you've picked up on Ray's a bit dog-like? Inoichi had to remind himself this was a young newly being educated child who had suffered neglect until the past few months. He wasn't on Ino's level. Not yet at least. At the boy's hesitant nod he smiled. You ever see dogs in the streets fight and bark over seemingly nothing? Yeah, sometimes. Naruto's eyes flickered up to Inoichi before going back to the now growling Anrei and narrow-eyed Ibiki who was trying to growl back. Well, Anrei is very much like them. All the Inuzuka are, but she's a bit more. We're used to it. She snaps, barks, growls, howls when winning a game of tag. If I recall, Inoichi trailed off in fond memory. Not that he'd tell Naruto she also tended to howl if riled up and fighting for their lives and she made a kill. It was something they just couldn't break her of, and not the safest instinct when hunting as a shinobi, but there you go. Fantastic ghostly bloodline gifts meet womanly temper and canine brain. Right now she's just trying to put Ibiki in his place because he said something so serious concerning our hierarchy without her permission. See, Anrei is the little run of our pack. Naruto's eyes were back on him with a giggle, the boy covering his mouth in delight. Inoichi was being very careful to nudge at Naruto's mind with a subtler version of his clan's jutsu they often used on toddlers so he wouldn't pay as much attention to the mild killing intent and snarling but otherwise stoic shinobi. Yeah, she's the runt, Naruto. I'm the oldest, then Ibiki. But since Anrei is the one with the instincts, he left it unspoken that in many ways she had the ability to back it up too. Genjutsu rarely worked on her with her strange chakra unless from either of them who had practiced it. Unfortunately, the same could be said for medical jutsu, so it wasn't all good. But when your opponent could make it where Tai and ninjutsu couldn't hit but she could just beat the crud out of you. It may have been her only real technique they worried over, but it was effective. She was still working her way through her father's scrolls, but time and place to safely practice was hard to come by when obeying the don't let anyone know about your really being a shinobi for the Hokage rule. So her instincts have her snap at us and try to put us in our places. Really, that's normal for shinobi clan women anyways, and it doesn't mean she doesn't agree with his views, so don't be upset there. Inoichi lifted a brow at the way Naruto stiffened. Really, Inoichi was a mastermind reader. Of course he knew what had really upset the kid. It's just that Ibiki said it without her permission, in her home, her territory, and with you here. Inoichi lowered his voice then. She is rather protective of you in her own way, even if she likes to stay quiet about it. Really? The quivering voice, the wide moist eyes. These were genuine, Inoichi could tell. At that moment he felt his heartstrings tugged on, because if this little child wasn't so similar, and yet different to his precious Ino. Now he saw why Anrei's comment about Ino and her hugs of doom may be applicable. He'd look into introducing them before Ino managed to be a brat in the academy. Sweet and precious his little lady was, but a spoiled brat with an attitude and ego she was too. It was a Yamanaka thing, indeed. What we are doing tonight. The snacks, the chatting, the silliness? This is normal. She hasn't let us come over for a while because she didn't want you to feel uncomfortable. Anrei is prickly like a cactus, Naruto. Be patient and let her initiate everything. It was the best advice he could give the little demon container, because it was clear to him from this visit and seeing them interact. Anre already had a spot for Naruto in her heart. This wasn't a mission anymore. It would just be a good long while before her brain caught up to that. Chuckling, he ruffled the blonde's hair. He had been technically illegally checking out Naruto's mind while they talked, hiding it under a genjutsu to share what he needed the boy to know. It was enough for Inoichi to rest assured this child next to him had nothing in common with the demonic fox, and he could accept him. That said, Inoichi turned back to watch Anre and Ibiki growl. He knew Naruto, and perhaps anyone not affiliated with canines would see just them staring and growling, but he'd spent years now around Anre besides their little pack bond. The volume of the growls, that she'd bitten Ibiki and he didn't return it when she chastised him in such a way. The absolute stillness of their forms. Finally Ibiki flicked his eyes away and Anre fell silent, a faint huff and leaning back into him as if nothing had happened. Really, for how long they were growling he figured they'd been tapping out ninja code to the other on the non-visible hands. They did stuff like that. Even in the midst of an argument. He took another picture while they were growling and distracted because it was just hilarious to see the runt taking Ibiki to task. It turned out, Naruto had created a drinking game, a non-alcohol related one, but it still worked. I didn't doubt that Ibiki would find a way to use it for work, either. Essentially Naruto challenged us all to telling funny prank-related stories with very diluted versions of Ibiki's numbing agent. We would tell a prank that we had done not seen or thought of but actually accomplished. The other three would guess if it was true or not. If you guessed wrong, you had to take a drink of our chosen beverage. If you guessed correctly, you didn't. The three of us knew each other well enough we could fake each other out slightly, but not enough even for such a game. Instead, it was a subtle test for Naruto to see if he was really, as I hate to use the phrase, but prodigal as I felt he could be. Prodigies fail if you suppress them. Say what you will any other way, but the Gaki's parents had definitely both been impressive. His father was easily a prodigy in a once-in-a-generation way. His mother had been a chakra monster but very clever and skilled at combat. It was definitely possible Naruto had slipped under the radar. If the potential to be a ninja prodigy was there, Ibiki, Inoichi, and myself wanted to find out. We'd already lost precious time to help him if that was so. Shinobi prodigies are different. They are entirely reliant on the first 6 or 7 years to shape their potential. If they don't have enough help to develop it, then they often fail to do so properly later. They'll still excel, but in only 1 or 2 areas. The prejudice of the village may have done irreparable damage, but we would find out. I was running through the alleys cause I can sneak through places with broken fences and run through back storerooms, so I managed to avoid even the masked guys after I put glue on the Hokage's chair. They were so distracted they didn't see me planting the stink bombs by all the stalls of the food sellers who were mean to me. Naruto ended his very long prank spiel. Apparently one prank for him led into another, very curious. The three of us were just blinking. We had let Naruto go first. After all, how much could one little kid have gotten up to in the way of unbelievable pranks? The answer is we couldn't even talk. So he kept going. After the 5th prank spiel, we just had enough of the numbing agents in our system to talk funny. The 7th made my tongue feel swollen. We were on 12. 12 times the sheer absurdity of a kid his age pulling this stuff off made us doubt all our intelligence gathering and doubt him. Dread coiled in my stomach as I had shaken my head, and he got that blasted foxy grin. Again. Huh. The Gaki had duped me and 2 of T and I's finest. We threw the drinks back and Naruto smirked and nodded, pleased. I really did. Sorry. I felt more sorry for the little blonde, to be honest. The way my brothers were eyeing him, I suppose I should eventually let Naruto in on the fact that they saw his potential. Naruto wasn't book smart, but he had instincts and talent that landed him in an entirely different prodigal sphere. Uncle Ibiki wanted to harness him for something. I had a feeling it was the prankster side of Ibiki that wanted him as an apprentice too. Poor Konoha. So, Uncle Ibiki seems to be right. Naruto said as he walked in, ditching his shoes at the front door by the sound of it. Well, hello to you too, Naruto. Welcome back, brat. I called out sarcastically as I kept washing the rice to set in the cooker. Pfft. You smelled me a mile away. Naruto was laughing as he said that. I think the skills I had from my clan never ceased to amaze him. Of course he liked to tease me about them too. I'd caught him trying to improve his sense of smell. Who knows, maybe with the fox in him he'd do it. Go wash up in the bathroom. I snapped out, grinning at how comfortable he was. This was an entirely normal yelled exchange now. A year had passed since the great Meet the Pack meeting. Somehow time just hadn't been on the side of introducing Ino-chan, the hugger of doom, with Naruto, the perpetually in need of affection. I think it was partly because my brothers and I are selfish, and we rather enjoy the looks of awe from Naruto. Yeah. Seriously. Shinobi, remember? Screwed up and shallow. Naruto dropped his book bag by the door, and went in to wash up as I continued making lunch. Naruto had a routine now. He'd leave the orphanage in the morning and go to the academy until lunch. At that point it broke up for the younger classes and he'd come over to eat and fill me in. Then he'd take a snack with him and go to civilian school for the afternoon session, and either visit me for dinner or go cause pranking trouble if not doing homework. Technically the pranks were a sort of homework from Ibiki, but that was a secret he'd actually managed to keep. During the weekends he joined me in town to help out with those I knew there and soak up the attention from those who weren't ninja and saw him as just a regular kid. That yakisoba haunt of mine had taken to utterly spoiling him, and he'd get extra mochi in a bag when we left. He still wasn't pack or family really, but even I could admit he had a nice little spot in my life now. I'd taken to calling him my seriously whacked out little cousin, and the gaki had piped up that meant Ibiki and Inoichi were his creepy evil overpowered uncles. They'd been very happy with their new titles. So was I. Apparently he picked up on the dynamics of Inuzuka enough he'd call me alpha bitch or boss as often as Nei-san out in public. He was even learning some of the growls and grunts that were for greeting or affirming things. Body language was something else he was picking up on like a freaking sponge. Ibiki and Inoichi had swiftly realized that brains were not Naruto's skill but observation and improvisation was. That and eventually sheer brute force. Made sense with his lineage. Can I help? Naruto came over, the faint pine scent of the soap in the bathroom clinging to him, and I chuffed once, pointing to the teapot. A laugh greeted me as he started to dig through the cupboards. I'd moved everything lower so he could get things looking for what tea he wanted to use that day. Since it was an electric kettle and one of the first things he learned from watching me was how to prep tea, he'd taken it over as his job. So, now what was Ibiki right over? Is he going to be insufferable again? I asked calmly as I set the rice in the second cooker. I hated leftover rice, so I always had a fresh batch going. Naruto would take the leftovers with him and use it for breakfast the next day or a night snack at the orphanage. Naruto had a faint edge to his voice, one that I knew was to blame by my packmate's influence, and I hummed, waiting. We were trying an experiment to see if they're purposefully sabotaging the training of orphans over clan kids. I'm sure that it was one particular orphan, but Ibiki couldn't exactly explain that one, could he? Naruto kept going. So he's asked me to keep track of my tests' results if the tests seem different from when I hand them in or get them back. If I can spy anything different about the ones around me. I get busted for trying to cheat, but it's enough to note if they have different questions. They do. Today was the first time I think that it was a genjutsu over my test though. The kid sounded frustrated, a little angry and hurt. Everything he had a right to be. Well, if you are both right, collecting evidence through your years at the academy may save lives later on. I know you're not book smart, Naruto, he snorted. Oh look, he's picking up habits. Listen, you've got good eyes and instincts. You also wouldn't just bring this up for no reason. You have a theory? This was something Inoichi insisted on, that we start trying to get Naruto to think ahead. He'd never be a strategist, but as a heavy hitter he needed to not slam into something that would explode. Literally. Well, the clan kids always do better. Yet, I know Ibiki's not from a clan. He paused, and I could tell the clan kids are always the best had already been seeping into his schooling. I waited. But it's not that way at my other school. Family doesn't mean anything when it comes to brains there. I mean, the best student has a sibling who keeps trying to eat glue, and we are way too old for that. Naruto grunted and then set the tea out. I scooped out rice into 2 bowls from the other cooker, and topped it with curry to set down. As we both started our lunch, I knew he wasn't done. Naruto had the sort of brain that needed to talk to think. Or pace. He needed activity. A result of too much chakra. So what if it is not that they are clan that makes them better? I mean, some have bloodline, but the Inuzuka still work their tails off. Yeah, my clan was still wary around him, but I think they liked knowing I was taking him on. Clan thinking was that one of us was always the best for the job. Besides, he had these hilarious scuffles with Kiba. I was fully intending to ask Sam to let the brat join in on some of the clan classes later, if only so he could feel like he belonged somewhere. Tending to 9 dogs and body language and canine language classes weren't exactly clan secrets. True. I paused then and looked at him as I picked out the broccoli. In curry, this was seriously my favorite vegetable. You can see it in the Inuzuka. You can see it in me. I pointed out as I chewed, watching him eye me in thought, while scarfing down his food as fast as he politely could and refilling his bowl a few times. I am half Inuzuka, but I can't use any of their clan jutsu. But I was a clan kid. So what does that say? Your Akiryo blood is stronger in you. Naruto didn't even hesitate. He'd been figuring out the difference in the past year, and I know Inoichi was insanely proud of him for it. None of us had given him any hints since that one night, but he'd managed to guess a while ago that the Akiryo was wolf-based as much as Inuzuka was dog. Technically, hybrids often didn't do so well. They could go crazy and wild, or they'd just be different. A dog would give up if he couldn't figure something out and look to his master. The wolf wouldn't. That was where my stubborn streak came from. I was loyal to those I chose to be loyal to. Nothing else. My pack, my clan, my Hokage, my village, my friends. In that order. My village only came sooner because my good friends were rather patriotic and wouldn't abandon the village anyways. I nodded at Naruto though and decided to help him out. He was barely 6 after all. Exactly. So even though I'm a clan kid, I was a different sort of clan. It made me a worse candidate at the academy, not better. So you may be onto something. It was true after all. If you judge me as so many did by academy standards, I was definitely a failure. As my own weird little niche though, I was perfectly as I should be. I was highly impressed though that Naruto and Ibiki had come up with the idea, and Naruto was working on gathering evidence. It'd be something though if you can amass all this the entire time at the academy, be something of an ultimate prank, wouldn't it? A foxy grin was my answer. Apparently prank was the magic word. Gaki. We returned to our food in silence for a while before Naruto started telling me about what they had studied. I packed up the leftovers for him and sent him on his way. Only when he was gone did I let out a breath, feeling the quiet of my home. In little ways Naruto had started to claim his space in my territory. There was an orange pillow now on my couch. He had a favorite teacup with little goldfish on it. His chopsticks were the mismatched set. He had a toothbrush in the guest bathroom and picked out the pine-scented soaps. I was fine with certain scents, subtle woodsy ones were best, and he agreed there. On nights when it would be cold or overly hot, or just plain couldn't handle being at the orphanage, he would spend the night. As I'd said to Ibiki over a year ago, he had claimed one of the guest rooms, though he preferred sleeping on my giant squishy couch, as that was where he'd first met his uncles and started becoming a part of my life for real. The year had blurred by. Naruto had thrown himself into studying because he wanted to please his new friends, who later formed into his uncle figures. Ibiki and Inoichi were far more accepting of Naruto than I had feared. Inoichi was the first to fall. Of course he had Ino, and the fact he gave small touches and smiles, often ruffling Naruto's hair, as he did Ino's, had only cemented Naruto's adoration of the fellow blonde. Ibiki was stern and serious, but he had a bit more of my wariness than Inoichi. Neither of us was really kid people, but Naruto could make an exception to anything it seemed. Ibiki treated Naruto more like his future apprentice. Me? I was his big sister figure best I could tell. I preferred the term cousin, close enough to care but distant enough no one really expected me to do much about it. I certainly wasn't his mother, and I had no interest in being one. That was something I found hard to explain. I found kids amusing enough if they weren't screaming or spewing bodily functions out. I liked to borrow Hana and Kiba and return them to Tsum after tussling about with them on a full sugar high. I was their favorite auntie and quite content that way. Unlike some Inuzukas, my evenings weren't filled with a string of lovers. I felt the more wolf inspiration of my bloodline and knew I would likely never find myself a true partner. Without one I had no interest in even considering children. Besides, Ibiki and Inoichi would keep anyone else away. I wouldn't be able to tolerate a non-ninja or at least ninja-understanding male, and no one could know I was a shinobi to the Hokage. Not a good way to start an intimate relationship, already hiding so much of myself. I felt no guilt over doing so in regards to my semi-pseudo family member in Naruto though. Either someday he would be important enough to me I would fill him in, or he would just never know. I slipped my hand through my gloves and walked out a little later, heading straight for the civilian part of town. It was far into Konoha, often not as well kept as the shinobi parts of town. People here made do with their efforts and manpower rather than chakra, and it showed. Paint sometimes was peeling off locations or faded, things weren't in as good of repair. People moved slower, and no one was jumping at every sound. It was a world within another world, and I felt my shoulders ease and my steps slow comfortably. Ikirio! I turned, hearing my name called out by a cheerful older man who was waving politely. Chuckling and stepped towards him, one of a pair from my favorite booksellers. He'd been one of my supporters when I was little and failed the academy. He'd given me my first real job and always kept a special place in my heart. It helped that I loved to read with a voracious passion. Hello, Tai. I'm happy to see you as always. There was no formality though. I disliked touching many, but this elder had been there for me, along with his wife. They had been the ones to shelter me when I needed to get away from ninja. When adjusting without my father and with the clan thinking I was just a failed runt, it had been to them I had returned. I'd slept on a mat in their shop's floor, if not one of the chairs inside, more nights than Naruto had done the same in my home. And we loved seeing you come in for tea. Tai had soft brown eyes and hair that had once been brown as well but was now thin and gray. His own wife had black eyes and still black hair cut short. They had a softness about them that was missing in shinobi, with smile lines and crow's feet that attested to full grins and joy in their life. A childless couple, they had simply decided to take care of any strays in need of a little time and attention. Tai and Mikasa were probably the most influential civilians in my early life, and remained precious to me. I considered their home, and thus them, my territory. They lived above a crowded shop that was a bit dusty and dark, their home a simple flat. They were good people, honest and hardworking, and their scent was of vanilla and books, ink and a little musty, and always jasmine tea. It would be the highlight of my afternoon, thank you. Tai's eyes danced as he took my elbow and escorted me in. Mikasa was waiting at the counter, and she giggled much like a baby in sheer unreserved delight at seeing me. Ikirio! Oh dear, darling girl. Mikasa was no ninja and she moved slower these days, but she had her hands to my face shortly, pulling me down to look me over. I was a little taller than she was and yielded without hesitation. Though they knew my name Andre, they preferred to call me Ikirio, because like my name I apparently always seemed to radiate something ghostly to them. It had become a nickname almost. That, and neither wanted to call me Silent Tears. They really were lovely. I made a mental note to introduce Naruto to them soon. Now then, Mikasa always had tea going, and she handed me the warm gray pottery, one of her own making down at the local shop that had let her use their kiln for a tiny amount. It wasn't a pretty mug, but it was clumsy and adorable and left you feeling special for using something handmade. They had chairs in small groupings in the tiny store and nestled among the poetry books, the tiny little lamps strung over the ceiling, the familiar feel of faded and worn velvet against my back. I felt myself going boneless. Jasmine tea just slightly sweetened danced over my taste buds as warmth pooled in my heart. These people were so very dear to me, and I could say without hesitation I loved them. They were my mentors, my gateway into seeing that beyond school civilians could offer so much to those around them. Tell us what you've been up to lately. I heard rumors of a little blonde boy. Mikasa's soft dark eyes danced in joy as she gossiped, and I chuckled. Sorry Mikasa, Naruto isn't mine. You mean not your son? Tai smiled at me as he cupped his own tea mug in his large ink-stained hands. You say his name like he's something special. It rolls off your tongue with a comfortable tone. Tai always had an uncanny ability to read people. I feel my head nodding without permission and smile softly. To the man who taught me to read the more archaic poems. To find ways to word haikus and the simple joy of painting with ink. Tai would have been a fantastic Lord Scribe, or second son. Instead he was a humble man who had built the very shop we sat in, and loved his books as much as his wife. He could read me too. I'd been coming here so long, and as a civilian I didn't act reserved or wary. My shinobi life and thoughts were locked far away when I was here. I'd found them back when I was Naruto's age. I'd think they'd have learned much of my tales at this point. After all, he could be mine. I conceded. I know they are aware of the Akiryo. They have us in one of their books, and they know of me from my explaining how Akiryo are different from Inuzuka. I'd had to do that after I'd called them and their home mine before. Not yet, though special I would miss him now should he vanish, but I sipped my tea, taking my time to respond. It's quiet in here, the street noise muffled behind the bindings of so many tales. I think in time. I'm glad. Mikasa nods, bird-like in her swift movements. I'd like to see you settle down. Her eyes goes to where her hand and ties is entwined, just from habit. To know as we have known contentment. Your eyes gleam though, Akiryo. This little Naruto gives you purpose. I think on that, and then slowly nod. This is true. My life is my pack, but with Naruto mission or not I find many things I had become dull to knowing. I had simply started to see the gray rather than the rain and clouds that caused it as they fed and nurtured the world around us. Naruto brought back the mud puddles in the races, the awareness of cold breath puffing out and slick ground beneath my feet. He brought life to the ghost who hadn't realized she'd been passing through. I'd been existing, not living. Ibiki and Inoichi were there, but my purpose had been missing. Unless a mission came along I had my work, my odd jobs, but nothing I could grasp onto and talk about. I'd been isolated in a crowded village. I was more aware than ever of the bond one had held unconsciously with the Gaki, but I just smiled at Mikasa and nodded. I'll be sure to bring him by. The topic changed to recent published works, including their laughing over a popular naughty book that was out now. From the faint flush the two had, I just chuckled. Old people can be so entertaining. I'd walked in on Inoichi and Ibiki at the wrong moments. Shyness wasn't something I had even if you didn't factor in my clan. If Sim wasn't caught out in one of the public parts of our clan property with a lover at least once a week, she was back on again with Kiba's father. Those days meant romping in the forest, so we ran into her less. And she was considered tame. Whatever other errands I had planned were gently pushed aside. Mikasa and Tai were so happy to see me, and it took a few hours to insist gently that they allow me to help out. I handled moving heavier boxes and dusting some taller shelves, talking the entire time about simple things. I passed on the stories of my honorary niece Ino, Kiba, and Hana. They knew of Ibiki and Inoichi, had met them a few times but mostly were just cool and polite to them. They were shinobi after all, and Tai and Mikasa simply could not understand them any more than the average civilian could. The classic quandary of the farmer that looks at a wandering warrior covered in blood and thinks with absolute certainty that they could not do that, and is comforted by those ideals. Tai and Mikasa knew if it came to it, they could. For their lives, but simply could not fathom returning again and again, to do things that were not always honorable. It wasn't always about protecting people and the village after all. There was espionage and assassinations and much of this being done with children, and they were honestly some of the most understanding of the idea of shinobi I had met. Shinobi learned to set who they were aside for the sake of a mission, trusting their kage to know what was best. Civilians had to follow their own moral code at all times. Sometimes they failed, but it was much harder. They could not comprehend simply setting aside a dislike or horror at an act because it was needed to be done to complete a mission. Both sides did what they needed to move forward. I was just always caught in the middle. My hand stilled, setting down a particularly soft leather-bound book for a moment as the idea swam free. I was caught pretending I was only a civilian, as even if the truth had come out I would be a lesser shinobi to most. Unable to master jutsu as they did. Naruto, because of what he held within him, would force his way into the shinobi world but always be looked at just a little off. I was teaching him to integrate with the civilian world because they held no such animosity, and indeed blamed the shinobi for so many things that they would ignore shinobi gossip. Like me, he was between the two. A little more of my heart went out to him. I looked down over my shoulder, seeing Tai and Mikasa tending to the books, and for a moment their older forms were replaced with the aged, but younger versions I had originally met. Time was one thing we always had in dwindling supply. I'd make certain Naruto learned he was truly important to me that night. After I made sure Tai and Mikasa knew the same. It was a rare evening that Ibiki or Inoichi couldn't come, but considering my epiphany in the bookshop, I was glad for it. Usually everything was better when I was there with my pack, but tonight I was hoping Naruto came. It was going to be a cold night out, and I knew the orphanage was not that warm. I didn't have to wait long. Naruto came bounding in, dropping his shoes and bag at the door and laughing. I chuckled and watched him bounce about as he told me how exciting they had it today at school because they were all learning classic stories and they were acting them out. He was talking about the samurai in the play they were reading were not as cool as shinobi, but they were still cool. I watched him bounce around and waited for my moment. Fingers running through Naruto's hair made him suddenly fall silent. He tilted his chin up, eyes closed as he let loose a shudder of pure delight, going still. My fingers combed through the short and ever so soft blonde hair, ruffling his locks affectionately. For as loud as Naruto was, with this he needed no words. When he turned with his eyes watering, I just left an arm out so he could curl up against me and cry. I think they were happy tears. Some things didn't need words. This was Naruto though, so I kinda pranked the Chunin hangout room in the tower. I looked down, smiling as he had clearly picked up on that I had no idea what to say. Besides, I liked his pranks. I got that numbing stuff from Ibiki and worked it into a thick paste in the pipe that goes to the water fountain. They'll never figure it out, and they'll all be going numb. Ibiki was smirking when I told him what I did with it. That is pretty funny. I chuckled at the idea of a bunch of Chunins not knowing why they were talking funny over time. It was not even obvious unless in high dosage, so it would take a while for them to pinpoint the water fountain for it. Naruto beamed up at me, then tucked his head back against my side. I think you've successfully fulfilled his rule of finding a new way to use that, so if I recall, Ibiki has to teach you to make a new poison, right? Databeo, Uzumaki Naruto. Get over here and tell me how beautiful I look in my new hair ribbon. Little 7-year-old Ino tossed her ponytail to accentuate the blonde strands and stood with her hands on her hips. She had met Naruto just under a year ago, and had quickly decided that Naruto was her favorite lackey. The devious little Yamanaka had figured out swiftly that her hugs of doom tended to get a smiling Naruto to agree to just about anything. Ino had taken one look at the quiet and nervous blonde boy, sniffed approvingly at him on the first meeting and said, "Well, we blondes have to stick together, but you must always admit I'm the prettiest girl ever and you can be my minion." Naruto had blinked and scratched the back of his head, confused. "You mean friend, right?" "Well, of course. Just my friends can't be more amazing than I am." Well, Naruto had just not known what to do and Ino had rolled her eyes, bossing him around easily and ignoring the three adults, falling over practically in laughter. "Just nod your head. It saves time." That had been the start of an amusing friendship. Ino's behavior meant no one in the academy picked up on that they were actually friends, because of how she'd start to lecture him and Naruto would just go along with it, utterly confused. Ino had been instructed painstakingly by her father to not give anything away as Naruto was working on cataloging bias against orphans in the academy for Ibiki. Ino was rather tickled to be allowed in on the secret, and if her bossing went a little closer to bullying, she'd make up for it later when they'd be at one of the adults' homes. It was fairly impressive for two 7-year-olds now to be pulling off, and Inoichi was as proud of both of them as he could be. Ibiki was biased towards his unofficial prankster apprentice. Anroi would just give them blank looks when they tried to get her to take sides, mutter about blondes and children, and then go back to what she'd been doing. Ino knew Anroi loved her though, as did Naruto, even if she was more a subtle action sort than outright words. She'd fix their clothes or muss their hair, and often have a content chuffing sound or a bark to her laugh. Those were good moments, and Naruto never doubted she cared anymore. Her eyes had a specific soft gaze that was his alone, and the demon container loved when he did something to make her proud. "Coming, Ino!" Naruto bolted over to Ino, who did have a pretty new pale blue ribbon in her hair. They were out in one of the further training grounds near the Yamanaka's home so Inoichi could work with his heir on her beginning training to use the family jutsu. The thing was, Naruto was a prankster. So he didn't just accept Ino's bossing, he turned it into a game. "Why, Ino-chan?" Naruto gasped then and put a hand to his head. "The beauty I see before me makes a hair ribbon so unimportant. Like comparing the radiant sun to a lowly daisy. How lucky I am to be in your presence." Ino beamed and twirled, delighting in the playful attention. "You're too good for me, and my heart, Ino-chan, but I shall pine for you from afar." Naruto didn't understand half of the stuff he was saying, but he'd overheard his uncles and Anrei jokingly say this sort of thing when they'd been into the sake, and like everything else, he stored it for later. I looked over at Inoichi, and the eldest of us just groaned. He's going to get her expecting that in the future. On the plus side, he'll make it impossible for any boys who don't see her as family to even try to compete. Ibiki pointed out casually. Ibiki loved mentioning Ino and future boyfriends. Then again, I'd found an entire file on ways to terrify anyone thinking they were good enough for her, so at least he was prepared. It made Inoichi twitch. "I suppose it is a good thing we just have the two Gakis. Can you imagine otherwise?" I smirked then and shrugged. "I think Inoichi is the only one of the three of us safe to breed." Ibiki gave me a flat look, his tone utterly not amused at my word choice. I just turned my smirk into a grin. Breed. Considering out of the three of us I'd have the most work to do if I did procreate, I'd prefer not to. Besides, I can already tell an older Ino someday about how unlikely getting any prospective dating material, much less someone into bed, is around the two of you. Ha ha. Yes. Ino is never going to date. Inoichi snorted, slinging his arm around me. The whole bit of how I simply couldn't be in a real relationship without it being mostly a lie, not with my playing non-shinobi, was not even brought up. Never. I'll bribe Naruto to prank anyone who even tries, so do make sure to train him well, Ibiki. I'd not even mind if he knew how to dispose of bodies. Well, doesn't TNI like volunteers for new methods? I chimed in. Ibiki just looked at the two of us and lifted a brow. He has this way of doing it with the right eyebrow that just screams a warning that he's about to screw with your mind, playfully of course. Work mode. Ibiki gives no warnings. Who is saying Naruto won't decide to make his playing of words now valid in the future? The likelihood of her teammates being another Ino Shikacho is high. Naruto will be her only other close contact outside of that because of our little family. What? Inoichi went flat-toned, and a mild killing intent started to leak out of him. I was pretty certain he was imagining the two blonde hellions in some drastic scene, and I took the liberty of elbowing him in the side. Both of you are jerks. Thank you. We resumed watching Naruto and Ino play. They were taking a break to let Ino's mind adjust in between sessions. Ibiki had been drilling Naruto on his light-fingered techniques. The expression on that little Gaki's face when he learned just how valued stealing was to ninja who did intel work, while I think his believing our discussions of his prankster habits being a sort of prodigal sign was a lot more tolerable. The last 2 years had found us officially calling Naruto part of the family, not pack though. We'd only say it among the three of us, and rarely around or to Naruto. It didn't matter, he'd stop breathing for a moment each time, and if there was such a thing as joyful intent to match the killing one, the ball of sunshine radiated it. Ino and Naruto had a play date at least twice a week, oftentimes at my home, as Inoichi had been working extra hours, and this way Ino was learning some of the tricks from the flower shop as they applied to a more wild garden setting. Naruto was slowly starting to grow some of the basic plants and herbs in a tiny plot in my yard to make the concoctions Ibiki was teaching him. The two would often work on their calligraphy together. Ino did not go to the civilian school like Naruto did, but she enjoyed reading his lesson books as they often had short stories in them. It was a much less dry way to learn than the ninja classes. Sarutobi Hiruzen, our Hokage, had been very pleased with the ongoing status of my mission. It had gone into a monthly visit that I started to look forward to halfway through the first year. I'd been willing to give the demon container a fair shot, and instead fallen into adoration of the little brat. The first time I had admitted I was fond of Naruto, for being himself, I saw our powerful third Hokage blinking back tears with relief in every part of his posture. I kept him updated on Naruto's skills, his foibles, his silly habits and behaviors. Hiruzen's favorites were the personal little things that one only learned from living around someone, or doing the creepy stalker on thing, but whatever. Naruto had developed a habit to scratch the back of his head, or rub his neck when embarrassed or nervous, as I'd pinch him in his shoulder or neck much like a dog nipping at a puppy. He had a love of those silly aloe pulp drinks, as it was the first thing he bonded with Ibiki and Inoichi over, the infamous numbing prank that started it all. He still loved orange, but had decided a dark brown like Ibiki's coat was his second favorite. Ibiki had carried him to the hospital once when Naruto had a bad fever, from the orphanage, wrapping him up in his coat to help keep him warm from the elements. You didn't want to flicker with children if you could help it, and especially not sick ones. Ever since, if Ibiki had left the coat off to relax, Naruto would find some way to wear it for a little while. Naruto had dyed his hair tips orange the first time he got good enough grades that the barber in civilian territory kept his promise. The next color was silver like Ibiki's once was, then a paler blonde like Inoichi's. The final time that year he got it in a gray-blue color that was clearly meant to reflect my own brindle pattern. I may have pulled him in for a hug and nuzzled him. No one can prove anything though, Inoichi'd forgotten his camera. Naruto had meant to go back and have it fully colored, but then Ino had met him and made the idle comment one visit that we blondes look pretty together. You can stand next to me, we're the best looking pair here. With Daddy we could almost look like family. And Naruto had spent the entire night after she left staring into the mirror, as he fingered his blonde hair. He'd still get the tips colored, but he kept the blonde. I think they're almost done, Ibiki murmured, and I sighed, nodding. I'd like to borrow him for a week or so if it's okay. There's some theoretical work it's best to be supervising for. Ibiki trailed off and I looked at him sharply. He just patted my shoulder, slipping a scroll into my pocket at the same time. Every so often he'd borrow Naruto and teach him the ins and outs of a new concoction. What Naruto had no idea of is that at this point he was being distracted. Only when Ibiki and Naruto were busy working on something that couldn't have time spared from would Naruto stay with him instead of at the orphanage. He'd often get his assignments from both schools in advance so he could work on them from home. Ibiki would not let him out until Naruto could identify, explain, create, counter, and replicate on demand, as well as gather all the materials himself, whatever the new item was. This was the time I'd be sent out. Ghost was high in demand. Technically we were at peace, which is precisely why my skills, subtle and non-detectable, were so needed. I worked with Crane a good deal of the time. We could get in and out of places. He was so different from Guy that no one would put the two together. I still hadn't run into Guy in such a way we could visit or catch up. I'd like to start a friendship openly with the Green Beast, but it just wasn't plausible. Instead we did all our socializing when he was Crane and I was Yurei. Ghost. The Hokage had finally given me my own mask as I was being utilized more often. Not that I was Umbu, but I could blend, and being partnered with Crane who specialized in taijutsu, my Chunin level chakra abilities seemed to be glossed over if there were any other Umbu about, as they just assumed we were skilled in physical and let us be. My mask was white with red sweeping forms by the eyes and one stripe down the forehead, like 3 petals. It was simple and not meant to look like an animal at all, though Hiruzen had tongue-in-cheek said he got the idea from a painting of a wolf. Crane and I had been on a number of missions since the first. Ibiki was content to let him take things over, and the few times we'd had others with us I had not removed my mask. Crane had waited until I needed to do the work and we'd simply divided up from our group. They had no idea what I did after. In Umbu did not ask. I struggled to keep up with them, for which Crane worked with me when we could, mostly though I was unable to improve by much as I simply could not practice most of the time. When it was just the two of us he'd let me run when I needed, but otherwise would carry me on his back. I could phase out of the way anytime he'd had to engage in combat, and having enemy Nin trying to figure out where the second person went had given us a good advantage before. There was also the simple fact that I was working more. My skills were being used more often since I'd taken on the little Gaki in orange, and I suppose it was because now there was a greater bit of trust. There was also a surety to Hiruzen that I wouldn't betray Konoha beyond the fact that my 2 best friends were here. It wasn't like we could explain Pack to him. The Inuzuka would get it. Despite being insect-connected, so too would the Aburame. We were a breed apart, really. What sort of bird was that I saw in my garden anyways? Any idea, Inoichi? A crane. Seriously, can you be more observant for once? Ah. Thank the heavens for that. I could trust Crane. Just one? We need to work on your eyesight. Yes, just the one. I'm glad you didn't run out to see it though, they're serene. Take their time doing everything. Inoichi chuckled, as usual fully in the know of what was on my scroll. Hooray for painfully obvious shinobi code. Ours was even more so, if you knew the topic. Again, the amount of ninja that would be searching for far deeper meaning was pretty hilarious. You could set an obvious tripwire out, and the shinobi would be so busy looking for the pressure plate and testing for genjutsu they never see the glue on the floor. It was a tested fact on several jounin, because once you said something like that to Ibiki and Naruto they had to try it. Shinobi and shinobi wannabes. We have serious issues. What do you want to have Naruto working on? I looked up at Ibiki curious. Naruto had several powders now besides the numbing one. There was 2 varieties of itching powder, one that caused sneezing, a few sorts of contact dye, and the last one had been a mild muscle relaxant. All had been utilized in pranks and test kits. I think I'll get him started on exceptionally simple hallucinogens. After stressing to the point of making him wet his pants that he is to never try them on himself or anyone who is not an enemy of Konoha. He'll need to spend a few days just observing how I use them in interrogations, mild ones. Don't glare at me, Honore. It's standard special jounin protocol to be taught to not slip up and give information, not torture. He needs to be at least a few years beyond graduation before I'll teach that. I sighed but nodded. Ibiki was grooming Naruto to be his successor after all. Though if he did it right, Naruto wouldn't realize it until he'd already made Chunin. Relax, Ibiki. She's just fond of the menace. Inoichi paused. Well, and Naruto too, boys. I waited for their attention and smirked. Said mini menace is currently being hit by Ino. Naruto had messed up delivery on a compliment, it seemed, because he was being hit, and rather hard, by the smaller girl. Oh. Inuka-in. Say it. No, say it. I looked back at Ibiki with a chuckle and shook my head. As much as I love when they do this, I'd better stop them so I can say goodbye for a bit to Naruto. Go pack and let us enjoy watching it. Inoichi waved me off, grinning. They're both still smiling, so no one needs to interfere. Ah yes, ninja parenting meets pack mentality. If someone isn't bleeding fatally or insulting honor in a way that will cause an incident, slug it out or be underhanded. I just nodded and stepped away to go home. I stopped at a few places along the way to pick up real food to travel with rather than ration bars. Ghosting took a lot out of me and Guy's metabolism was insane. Packing was easy, so much simpler with my possessing my own mask which was already waiting on me. I got ready in the darkness of my room, window shades closed and swiftly fastening the modified armor, and combing the quick-acting chakra dye into my hair. I would have black hair this time around. Chakra dye was amazing stuff. It would adhere to the natural small bits of chakra you emitted and until you used the counter dye agent, was near permanent. Ibiki and I had learned that when we gave Inoichi blue hair to match mine 1 year before he met his now wife. We hadn't known about the neutralizing agent, so it had been highly entertaining to see him going around constantly screeching Kai. As frustrated as he could get. It was a specific form of chakra dye and it would snap to the chakra I put out right now. Even dispelling arts wouldn't toss it out later. Of course it did work on things other than hair until you set it with a chakra burst, which was what had started Ibiki on trying to learn how to make it himself. We had been caught blue-handed after pranking Inoichi. I knew to use gloves, Ibiki hadn't. Whoops. Throwing my hair in a loose bun with the top half and the bottom left to swing about, I fixed the mask to my face and then ghosted away. One of the huge advantages for my sneaking, I could be invisible and step out until I was in an area that wouldn't be odd to see one of the masked elite or pretending to be in my case bounding around. Over the years I'd needed to be non-visible more often than not. It also let me tail Naruto and ensure he was all right at first in the civilian territories. An ability that just 2 years ago I had struggled with was now becoming much more strong for me. It helped that usually I just needed to be invisible, more like a camouflage jutsu, but nothing else changed. Using my Akiryo abilities was always highly uncomfortable though. For one, cold. The more powerful the clan technique, the colder it was. I'd been having to slowly work on my tolerance over my career as a shinobi. Downside was I really hated being cold. I had opened my scroll before fixing my mask on to see I was to begin outside the village several kilometers to the east. It was my meeting place with Crane. Keeping the scroll on me meant I could go bounding over the wall, and the barrier wouldn't ping an alert. Taking another deep breath, I slipped into the thought process of Yuri. Inoichi had walked me through creating an alternate persona so I could compartmentalize easier when on missions. They did it for all the Umbu. I was just fortunate enough my packmate could do it without the training they had gone through. Yuri was quiet, almost silent. She was a bit aggressive and unfriendly to most. She growled and barked more, which most passed off as Inuzuka. Yuri obeyed Crane without second thought. Times when they would be waiting on other teams to trade off information or items, Crane worked with Yuri so they matched their fighting better. No movement of hers was wasted, nor a drop of chakra. Where Crane could expend vast amounts of energy being too swift to catch or chakra enhancing his muscles to the point he could punch through stone easily, he was the hurricane. Yuri was the eye of the storm. In taijutsu their styles meshed well, and Crane had reserved specific Umbu training sites without witnesses by Hokage's orders no less once a month on average just to keep that level of fluidity up. I slipped into being Yuri comfortably now. My body language would change as would my posture. Unrui was proud and a bit quiet on average, but certainly brash. You may pass your eyes over her unless she felt like being trouble and had an opinion. Yuri was silent and lethal. Unrui didn't have much fighting practice outside her family styles that she still worked on more out of enjoyment and to spar with her relatives, and only a few rather awful academy-level jutsus. Yuri had a number of strange unique killing and incapacitating jutsus and a deflection-specialized taijutsu. Hers was to wound, deflect, and pass them in an off-balance or disabled state to her partner. Yuri was a support fighter, but if she got a hit, her sudden death jutsus were always fatal. As it always occurred, Umbu did talk among each other. The first time Crane told me about Wellme, it managed to cement the dichotomy of my two personas for me. It didn't mean that when I was one, I didn't think of the other as someone else though. Yet, it wasn't a mental disorder or breakdown, more it felt like I need to be serious and focus on this rather than playing. Certain thoughts and things just faded in importance. It allowed me to be Unrui without being paranoid. It allowed me to be Yuri without my morals overriding shinobi necessity. That was precisely how Inoichi had helped me develop it. Hearing that you were known as ruthlessly efficient by Umbu was something else. Ibiki had been insanely proud of me. Of course. Sadist. I felt the ground give under my feet as I took to the trees, chakra keeping me in place between leaps. This chakra, my non-Akiryo jutsu-related use of it, felt warm and slightly tingled. Like my limbs had fallen asleep or I drank something with bubbles in it. I scented Crane before anything else. The rich loam and earth scent was nearly invisible amongst the forest. Nearly, but not quite. He caught up to and then passed me easily, scooping me up into his arms playfully. This wasn't a rush mission. It would take a week at least at his speed to get to the meeting point. After that, it was a simple exchange and theft. Sometimes I think we are assigned to these sorts of missions so that Hiruzen can send his better agents off on the more dangerous sort. Again, anytime there's a civilian town nearby, it's best to send me. After 2 years of missions more often than not together, Crane was able to follow my lead as well as I followed his in battle. I simply looped an arm around Crane's shoulder and neck, one hand free in case I needed to draw a weapon, which was why he only held me in one arm. Hello there, birdie. Greetings, ghost. Both of our faces were hidden by masks, but we could feel the other chuckling, our chakra smoothing out together as it was used to working in dangerous situations now. The benefit of fighting alongside friends long enough. I thought you'd let us play tag. Or chase, I brought up, curious as to why he was carrying me at the outset. Dog, rabbit, and their teams are working. People who knew him, and in his own way he was protecting his teammate by ensuring we were far enough away no one would pick up on my strangely slow for Umbu movements. No one really gave Crane, or Guy, enough credit for how considerate he was. We stayed silent the rest of the day, and half into the night. The man's stamina was utterly insane, especially when he felt he had something to prove or important to do. He bought us half a day's travel and despite being slightly tired then worked with me as we set up camp. We'd spar and twist in turn, slamming limbs into each other though we didn't draw weapons. We held back, no chakra enhancement. This was pure taijutsu in its rawest and simplest forms. Clumsy compared to chakra work, priceless when it came to ensuring you knew all the movements. We'd stop before we were too tired, taking turns being on watch. We slept in the trees, for Konoha ninja were at ease in our namesake territory. Moonset to moonrise we traveled. We arrived 3 days early. The mission was boring, an exercise in adrenaline that never was needed. We followed orders anyway. Back in Konoha, Ibiki chuckled as Naruto stared at the book with a serious expression. He rather looked like he was going to pop from focusing so hard. Naruto's face was scrunched up, rather unattractively. He resembled more someone who was stuck in the bathroom at that moment. The farewell to Anrei for the time being had gone simply. A quick hug, a promise that she'd return, and Naruto was willing to let go. It was better than if he had gone the insane clingy route. No, at this point, Naruto was aware that he had people who cared. He no longer clung to them like a limpet. He knew they called him family and that it was no small thing to the packmates. He was as loved as Ino, and Ino had swatted him a few times when he stammered it was different because Inoichi was her father. With a heavy sigh, and a far too sharp mind thanks to her being a Yamanaka, Ino had simply stated that is not how pack worked. Because it was Ino, Naruto believed her. Ibiki didn't spend as much time with Ino, though he'd listen to her prattle on or correct her on her stances if Inoichi was busy. That was purely Naruto who got to see the mentor and prankster side of the famous head of TNI. If Naruto couldn't counter the bullying about how he was an unloved orphan at the Shinobi Academy, at least he knew privately how wrong they were. He had influenced 3 homes. There was something of his at all 3 residences of the packmates, which let him feel the permanence of it all. And Ino's mother happened to enjoy how willing Naruto was to help out around the house. That she heaped praise on how strong and helpful he was just a little manipulation that made Naruto smile. Turned out he was rather good at working in gardens and cleaning floors at this point, and she was happy to pay him for the help and praise and treats. Ibiki resumed reading his own book, knowing Naruto would wait to ask questions until the end in case the material provided answers. Not that it had been easy getting that across to him. If there was a silly frog drawing an orange on his fridge next to Ino's flower picture, it wasn't as if anyone would know either. Naruto was 8 years old, and Naruto was doing very well in the civilian school. He still struggled with numbers and things, but his skill with history and poetry was going well. It should have been literature in general, but he just really liked poetry. Especially the epic ballads about heroes that had overcome great trials. He was doing amazingly well in his private studies with Ibiki too and had sat in on a number of Anbu interrogation training sessions. He had to wear a genjutsu for it, but he didn't mind. It was fascinating to watch his uncle Ibiki work. Ino had practiced her mind-body jutsu several times on Naruto, and each time he'd ended up fighting her off because she tried to do something girly like paint his nails. It had been a great lesson for Ino on not doing anything too shocking when her control was new. On her prompting, he'd been growing his hair out though. It did look really cool longer with the colored tips. He did keep it a bit shorter underneath though, so it didn't spike quite so badly. He was torn between keeping it short like his uncle Ibiki, or growing it long enough for a high ponytail like Uncle Inoichi and Ino, since she kept saying if he did they could pass as related. Even his big sister Anrei had long hair, though hers was usually escaping from a braid, or just loose and messy. He'd finally gotten her to cave to being called his older sister instead of crazy cousin. It made more sense since Ibiki and Inoichi were her brothers, and he'd ranted for a long time before she just smiled and said okay. And that had been it. Seriously, the pack loved to test him. Probably why they kept reminding him that shinobi were crazy. He tried taking his exam early just for more evidence in Ibiki's files and failed so miserably that it was clear he couldn't try again for a few years, and saw that he really did need a lot of work. It had been to gather a base point though, and they had that now. He had actually skipped a grade in history among the civilian classes, and was starting to take accounting, which was offered to any student who wanted it. Ibiki had been very pleased and even started to pay Naruto a pittance for his work if it exceeded standards. Inoichi still let his wife bribe Naruto with treats for his help, and Anrei wasn't the sort Naruto would ever ask for anything. Not since the one time he'd caught her mending a tear in her favorite shirt and asked if she could fix his jumpsuit. He'd ended up thrown over her shoulder again and taken to a civilian shop where he'd been panicking, fully expecting the nightmare that was shopping from Inoichi and Ibiki's stories, and the one time he'd let Ino force him to go. Instead, she'd set him down, asked what colors besides orange he liked, and told him to try on a few things. They were all the same in shirts and pants, so she could judge size. From there, she said, until they started to fit poorly, he didn't need to go back, and then they'd just get the next size up, showing him he could literally walk in and place an order from a catalog and have it delivered to her home to be kept in his room there. That was it. A few days later, his new dark blue pants, black turtleneck tank top, and one orange and one brown with black jacket had shown up. He also had the same shirt in a few other colors, and a few pairs of black pants. All identical besides color. Anrei had said being able to dress so you blended in with civilians was as important as dressing like a ninja, so he also had a few pairs of comfortable boots that were like hers, and one pair for harsh terrain or work so he didn't get mud on his feet. The store also had a single kimono sent for festivals and formal occasions for him in black with a frog down at the corner, to his delight. He was a kid after all. He still wore his jumpsuit with the patch as needed to the academy, which was as awful as ever. He struggled to learn anything there and was frequently catching himself in genjutsus. It seemed he had zero ability to sense when he was in them most of the time, but he could put it together when he'd have sworn no time had passed, and yet the bell would suddenly ring. It was frustrating. It was also hard not going up to Ino on days he really could use her company. Those were the days she'd belittle him or Sakura just to make a point. Of course, her fawning over Sasuke was seriously confusing. Why on earth did she like the brooding monster? Because of the massacre? That had happened. It had sent the entire village into a crazy mode, and the civilians were 1,000 times less happy. After all, the Uchiha had been their police. It had been the Uchiha who would step in if there was an issue between a civilian and a ninja, and most of the time sided with the non-ninjas. Naruto had felt awkward looking back on it, because he had been where Sasuke was. He'd been where there was no family and no one to turn to. Old man Hokage didn't really count because in Naruto's mind he was part of his pack now but hadn't seen it then. The dynamics were making more sense, and sometimes he got to hang out with Kiba as they'd play with the nin dogs. Anre was teaching him what growls and noises meant, and he knew she was still working on getting Naruto in with the littler kid's embarrassing idea just so he could learn fully what they all meant. Kiba, though, was teaching him to say stuff that was really not okay, and they had fun with that. Some chasing them around with a fly swatter to tan their backsides sort of fun, but still. Anre had just asked where he learned it, told him he growled too long at the end when it should be more of a yip, and asked him to make more tea. Best family ever. Naruto? You still up? Anre walked into the kitchen then and smiled, ruffling his hair in a way that always made him turn his head to prolong the contact. Anre wasn't super touchy-feely, but when she was in a mood for contact he never turned it down. Couldn't sleep, he sighed then and smiled at his big sister figure as she pulled out a slice of cake and 2 forks, sitting beside him and handing one over. Oh? It was soft, but the word would allow him to shrug it off or unload. Anre never pressured, never forced anything out of him. Yeah, nothing really, just can't sleep. Naruto shrugged. If he was with Ibiki he'd be trying to memorize components until he was blue in the face or passed out. In Noichi's house when he stayed over he was always out like a light. There was some sort of bedtime jutsu they used. It prevented Ino from painting his nails or doing his hair in his sleep, so it was all good. Anre, though, just hummed, shared the treat, and then made tea. Do you want company? From you, Nei-san? Always. It was the truth. While he loved his uncles fiercely, it was Anre who he had first been drawn to. It was the strange golden-eyed and blue-haired woman. He'd run into her, and then just been so startled when she commented their appearance combined he had stalked her after that. He'd wanted to know who she was, what was she. He'd been startled and yet near to tears when she actually asked who he was in turn. Then he'd been fed, had things explained to him slowly, simply. Over the years he'd come to realize how unusual the whole thing had been. He'd brought it up once, frustrated, and she'd admitted that someone had asked her to make certain he was okay, but that it was Naruto's own big blue eyes and fascinating company that had turned it into more than just a visual check-in. He believed her. Anre didn't lie, just stretched the truth, and when she did lie he had been taught all her tells. He struggled still with anyone outside his family, but within it, there was nothing getting by Naruto. If it was a stretching of the truth that she'd been asked to look after him, he could brush it off. There were plenty of things she couldn't share, but she never hid anything she felt he needed to know. He looked up, meeting her tired eyes, but she'd just gotten back from her trip and he wanted time with her. He was feeling vulnerable, and something about his grumpy, rather out there alpha set him at ease. Where'd you go? I smiled. Naruto had gotten comfortable in our relationship a while back, and it was rather nice to have a little brother for once. An outpost village, halfway between here and Suna. Nothing special, very small town. I sipped my tea, leaving the majority of the too sweet treat to Naruto. He ate it slowly, savoring the sweetness of the frosting before he blinked at me. Anything I can know? It was an information exchange. As usual. Just trying to keep the shinobi from blowing their cover. I closed my eyes for a moment, bone-tired. Crane had been with me as usual, but there was talk of his getting a genin team in the next few years, so our missions would start being swapped to another handler. I wasn't happy about that at all. I knew my brothers were scouring the Umbu and special jounin ranks for someone else I could tolerate, but I was a possessive wolf. I liked Crane, we worked fantastic together, and I trusted him. Still, the Hokage's word was a command I could not disobey, and so I peeked one eye open at the adorable concerned face of my little rascal of a brother. After a little more than 3 years I could admit to seeing him as such. It will be fine, Naruto, I chuckled then at his heavy sigh, guessing he just was unable to pinpoint what it was that was bothering him. Instead I slid his teacup over, smiling. He really was adorable. So, what does Ibiki have you working on now? Wires. I'm learning to set traps and hide the wires so they're actually effective, but it's hard because there's shiny. Naruto yawned once and then shuffled, cuddling into my side. He somehow had picked up on exactly when I was willing to allow such contact, and my fingers worked back through his hair. Thanks. You know, Anre, I wish I could stay here all the time and not the orphanage. I sighed softly, it just wasn't safe. It wasn't reliable either, and I just knew the Hokage wouldn't sign off on it. Instead I hummed faintly, nails gently scraping at his scalp. I'm not qualified as a guardian, kiddo, but when you graduate the academy you're considered an adult with all the rights and privileges. If you want you can live here all the time then. Though, usually they have genin housing for the orphans that's cheap. You may want your own space. I think I'd rather know I had people around that cared. Besides, you never have someone over, and once I ran into women's clothes at Ibiki's and Naruto just shuddered and I chuckled. Ibiki did have some kinks, but I knew he'd have hidden them from Naruto. He didn't need to know the woman probably lost her clothing because she'd been tied up most likely. Well, I paused and hummed then, answering his silent interrogation with that last line. I'm Morikirio. We wolves value our mates and I can't do casual. It took years to call you family after all, and you were all that time, it's just not my way. I've nothing against it, or I wouldn't make certain Ibiki and Inoichi knew when a lady was interested in them, but I shrugged. It was the simple truth. I kinda always thought you and Uncle Ibiki, not at all. We're close, the three of us, but it often feels more like we're so close we can't see each other that way. We never could, not really, but I didn't need to get into why and how. Besides knowing your uncles, can you imagine them letting anyone near me? You'll have enough trouble keeping boys from Ino too, you know? No one is getting to date Ino-chan. Naruto huffed, crossing his arms with an adorable angry look. She's too good for anyone, especially that stupid Uchiha she's always mooning over. They'll have to be really super strong and smart to be worth her. Ino's precious. And I felt my lips curve into a smile. He was so adoring of Ino, she of the hugs of doom who had accepted Naruto as part of the family without much pause. Indeed, I pitied anyone who set their sights on Ino one day because Naruto would not be swayed easily. Ino may very end up in the same situation I was in. Chuckling softly, I enjoyed watching as Naruto's fierce expression morphed into a shy, honest one. That's good, to protect those dear to you. I smiled and nodded. I have the family, as do you. Good instincts, Gaki. Naruto turned and tucked his face, thankfully having wiped it free of cake first, into my shoulder. His eyes closed as I felt him sniffing at me slightly. I'd been working slowly with his sense of smell much as I had been trained as a kid, and relying on that was becoming second nature for him. I just waited, curious if he'd say anything. Since when do you use berry body wash? I laughed and grinned down at him. Since someone left the lid open on mine when I always close it, and I didn't know what you boys did to my unscented one. Naruto just pulled out a foxy grin up at me. Color, just mine. Nah. I got Ibiki good. Then he rubbed it all over Inoichi, but they got it off a few days ago. And what color would I be now? Orange. Huh. I paused then, not at all perturbed, and lifted a brow, smirking at him. You should put it in the soap dispensers at school. Oh, it turned out Naruto did manage to get the entire academy turned bright orange. Surprisingly, since he didn't get caught, but gave it away laughing at how some people clearly had gotten it on their faces or clothing by being sloppy, he got in trouble. Naruto was currently sulking at my table while he munched on the weird ramen thingy I had made. You could turn vegetables into noodle-like shapes, and he didn't seem to mind them that way so much. I believe it is more because of a texture than a taste thing, or it could just be since I went through the effort of making him food he saw it as the affectionate gesture it was. It isn't fair. The damned Uchiha sneaks out from a lesson, and he's praised in how sneaky he is. Kiba ditches and avoids being found, and he's told he has good skills. One of the civilian kids went and did my eraser on the door trick, and he got praise for his ideas. Naruto trembled slightly, his voice shaking even as he slurped down more not ramen. I'd learned to make a pot of the stuff just for him. The fact that I had bits of chicken floating around in it seemed to make the vegetables easier for him to handle. I just unrene it, he slumped then, setting the empty bowl and chopsticks aside to clutch at his head, elbows on the table as he breathed hard. I just washed the dishes slowly, making a soft low whine to encourage him. I also knew what he was doing though. In 1, 2, 3, 4 hold 5, 6 out 7, 8, 9, 10, Inoichi had taught him the breathing mantra to help get his emotions under control. I set down the dishcloth and went to stand beside him, waiting. Soon enough big blue eyes were looking up at me, vulnerable and full of tears. I pulled Naruto into my grasp and sat us on the floor. No one would look in the windows at that angle, and I helped tuck him under my chin, my arms tight around his slim and still so small form. You have no idea how proud of you I am every day. You are doing so much, working with Ibiki and Ino, going to 2 schools. Naruto, it's a great deal you're setting yourself up for. It's not right, and it is not fair how everyone treats you. Even me when you first met me, if you recall? I felt his shivering nod, before he shifted to listen to my heartbeat, and I sighed softly, shifting so my back was against the wall for comfort. I can't get into it, Naruto, it's a ninja thing and I'm not a proper shinobi. Luckily it was the truth, even if stretched. Ibiki had already explained many times that shinobi were privy to things that they were never to tell civilians. He knew sometimes Inoichi and Ibiki filled me in, but I couldn't repeat any of it, ever. Naruto still just thought of me as the failed shinobi civilian. He loved me anyways. It did a lot of good healing the sting at being left out save for my packmates. It's just Naruto let out a whine then and I sat up startled. It was perfect, and it seemed he had done it out of instinct. It was a puppy's pitiful begging, heartache and hunger and instinctive for the adults around to soothe it. I don't want to be, it's not okay. It's not fair. Naruto turned and buried his face into my collarbone, stifling his tears. I felt it though against me inside, rubbing his back with one hand, the other keeping a fierce hold on him. Let it out, little pup, it's not fair. And it is not okay, weekend is coming, how about we just spend it together? He nodded, and gave a tiny hiccup so I continued, my voice softer. I'm not good at saying how I feel, Naruto. You know that? Yeah, I heard you laugh there, mister, but I am glad you are in my life. I just hate going back to the orphanage, it hurts, I hate I can't claim you or Uncle Ibiki or Inoichi, and it's Naruto trailed off in his awkward way and I closed my eyes at his confession, leaning my head back into the wall. He's only 8, why do we keep forgetting that? Just a child, a little fox kit. As out of place as I was being more wolf than dog among the Inuzuka. Few realize the depth of difference between the two, and he's separated yet again from everyone else. He's just a kid, he was so smart in his way, so capable and full of energy that maybe we'd been pushing too hard. Naruto had a family and stability, but it was now clear he felt it could vanish at any moment. I sighed heavily but tugged him a bit closer so he would realize it wasn't at him. It all comes back to the orphanage? I really don't like it, Anrene, it's their cold, they ignore me. I have a rickety bed that's awful, and if I don't take my stuff with me it vanishes. It's why I keep it all here. This is home, visiting either of my uncles is great, but when I'm there I wake up scared that I just dreamed all this. I can't promise anything. My voice was a bit rough there. I really hated talking emotions. Beyond saying I was proud of him, that was half analytical. Emotions were special, and anything beyond the superficial was saved for those few dear to me. Naruto knew this, and knew he was included. I felt Naruto still, felt him tense and wary, and that was hurtful in itself. I'll see if I cannot adopt you, if I can at least convince them to let you be housed here. Is that agreeable? Yes. If Naruto hadn't already been held so tight against me, I'm certain I would have been tackled. Instead he fell apart against me, but this time it was with tears I could scent were of hope and joy. I really had underestimated how much he wanted to be around his family, hadn't I? Well, visiting the Hokage for permission could wait. I had to let Naruto finish crying over me, and feed him the rest of the pot of not ramen. It would make going on missions harder really, but at least it meant Ibiki and Inoichi could have someone check up on Naruto, or an Umbu for the Hokage could. He may have to keep it secret still, gods know the civilian council would consider me a fit guardian as so many of them knew me, but the rest of the elders? They'd do their best to ensure it didn't happen. For the sake of the little blonde, I would have to face that risk. I owed him that at least. A few hours later I had left a surprisingly worn-out blonde tucked into the couch, sprawled out on his belly clutching the pillows and blankets from the last gathering the previous week. All of our scents were on them as it was getting cold at night. Naruto had his face shoved into them as if to reassure himself even in his sleep. That had made me decide to approach the Hokage tonight rather than waiting. I didn't dress up, I had nothing to hide or try to convince Hiruzen of anyways. I was just in my comfortable pants and boots, soft-soled as they were to not make noise. I couldn't exactly wear shinobi sandals unless I was being Uragi. Black and gray were my colors, though I had a dark orange undershirt on that Naruto had picked out for me with gold leaves trailing from the left shoulder down across to the hem. It was rather pretty and suited to the colder climate. Well, cold for Konoha. My usual black jacket over that and my hair in a messy braid, and I looked no different than any other time I would pay a visit to the Hokage. It was strange for it to be at such a late hour. Still, I was blessed and Hiruzen had me brought in almost immediately. We talked nonsense before he dismissed his Umbu under a ruse every visit. I expected this to be the same. Thank you for escorting my ninja again, Ikiryo-san. Though the reports I received was quite interesting. Why exactly did you have them buying such simple and restrictive groceries? Hiruzen was genuinely curious, and I was amused. I imagine reading that report had been entertaining since he was leading with that statement. We were in a farming town, Hokage-sama. It is a poorer town for all it is doing well. You had me accompany a group that was to blend in like common working folk. That means a lack of funds in that area, relying most often on barter, and being reluctant to spend coin they may not see replaced. I had them only buy what others would there. The foods and meats were more for tourists, and heavily salted and preserved to prevent spoilage. It would have been as obvious to the group that was trailing the enemy not being simple people. They're lucky I didn't tell them to work in exchange for room and board. That's very common when people have little to nothing. It was not a badly affected town though. It's also new and not yet prosperous. There was little currency there to spend, which is most common. It was the simple truth. New neighborhoods were built from hard work. They would have noticed someone in better clothing than what I had convinced the Chunin to wear. There was also no reason for such simple wanderers to have so much to spend. It would likely have claimed them as robbers for that, and there would have gone your infiltration. You don't think they're so observant, surely? Hiruzen blinked as he filled and lit his pipe. I felt the urge to groan rise, but hid it. I imagine he saw the tells anyways. They are civilians, yes, but it is their home. They know those people, there's little else to talk about. Just because they aren't trained from an early age to notice everything doesn't mean that they wouldn't pay closer attention to the new people in the area. It's exciting and will draw more attention than usual, especially because one of the chunin with me was a very exotic-looking woman and didn't use chakra dye or cosmetics to hide her attractiveness, as she should have. I wanted to ruffle my own hair in irritation. It never ceased to amaze me how there was such a general notion of, oh, they aren't ninja, so they're just money sacks and workers to make our lives easier. The level that the ninja tended to think themselves on versus the common person rankled. They could fling fireballs and prance across rooftops, do tricks that shouldn't be possible outside of fables. Yet ninja couldn't survive without the people they tended to belittle. It was a screwed-up system, and I was caught between. It was no wonder why I had Naruto attending a regular school and Inoichi was homeschooling her son. Surely not notice enough to endanger such a mission though. Hokage-sama, you're the god of shinobi, but I think I know more about how civilians think. They'd notice. They'd talk and gossip, and the shinobi you were hoping to ambush would have been tipped off because the chunin you sent me with had no basic civilian skills. They could not speak of a trade, the jargon used was unfamiliar to them. They don't know how to handle the farm tools with the ease they handle kunai, and all those artels. My advice had been for them to pretend to be a few types of injured having survived bandits, or using the recent flood in the area, but your chunin were convinced it couldn't be that hard. No chakra meant their muscles weren't used to it, and they were flailing like idiots. Just as you can tell an academy genin from a special jounin by how well they know their tools, farming families are raised to work and do things. They don't cringe and flinch at blisters because most of the time they already developed calluses to those tools before they left puberty. I saw Hiruzen making a few notes, but sighed inwardly. He had no idea. None of them ever did. At that point, however, he held up the forms, likely the official mission statement, which now had notes on whatever he thought of my response, and his umbu popped over. Take these, be in no rush to return. Ah, there was the umbu dismissal. Now, what can I do for you, Anrei-chan? Sarutobi Hiruzen slowly drew out one of his smoke rings so it would spiral from his breath. Naruto hates the orphanage. I know I cannot adopt him, but could we arrange for his housing to be in my home? This is no small thing, you ask. He's already stalked by umbu. He spends much of the time at my house or Ibiki's. I have no influence to the council. I'm tolerated by most shinobi but ignored. I work a few small part-time jobs here and there when I need cash that are civilian-only work. We could just spin it if need be that it was a way to help me pay bills. And that since clearly I'm no one important, I have no idea what's wrong with him. I blurted it out in a rush. Normally I'm much more controlled, but this is my gaki we are talking about. I care. I'm not saying I'll claim him as family out of doors, though I'd be tempted to otherwise, but he was crying, Sarutobi-san. Crying. It broke my heart. Hiruzen shifted, letting me know wordlessly he was uncomfortable with what he would say next, or at least wished me to think so. I was checking in on him after I heard about the academy incident. I saw. It will mean you have to be very careful and likely will have much more negativity directed at you over time. He's worth it. I didn't mean to cut off the Hokage, but the words flew out. They were sharp, fierce. I think I was growling. Oops. Hiruzen gave me a dark look but then relaxed visibly and nodded. So he is. Very well. I won't officially take him out of the orphanage's care, but I'll let them know he has another residence he is authorized to be at when you are in town, so they don't remove that as an option. Just in case. In case I never return from a mission, he meant. I nodded, sensing he wasn't done. I'll notify the hospital as well and put a note in the academy files, under AC class secret, where they aren't to bring it up. I cannot prevent it, and you may have a few hostels to cope with, so there will be umbu about. If I call for you, extra discretion will be necessary. In other words, don't be seen or leave your Yurei gear out where someone can see it. I bowed my head. Thank you? I have no idea why you are thanking me, Anrei-chan. You're asking me to put you through harassment, and taking on a lot of responsibility. I moved Naruto's stuff while he was asleep. He figured it out when he went to get a change of clothes the next morning and saw the note pinned to his door amending his dwelling to include my home. To celebrate, he had trip wire all over the house with chakra dye wouldn't stain anything non-living, feathers, several traps that released confetti, and I think he actually managed to steal a cake. Needless to say, we spent a very messy morning having cake and tea for breakfast, and ignored the disaster that was my house and our current state of being. If this was what I was in for, I could handle it. That we both were laughing and smiling was, after all, a wonderful sign. Of course, I may have challenged him to set the same pranks off at Inoichi and Ibiki's homes, complete with a slice of cake for each, but hey, the gaki was up for it. Ibiki did look fetching in maroon, Inoichi was a very pretty purple, and I was, of course, Uzumaki orange. The brat managed to get covered in all three colors in the process, and even Ino had been roped into helping at her house, and was half purple. The disaster photo of the lot of us Inoichi's dear wife took, rolling her eyes when she was done laughing. I was planning to have a print made for Naruto, but a large one was going up in my living room. No one would ever believe it had been real. Pain. Anrei-chan. Ne-chan. It was a frantic voice. One fraught with concern and tremulous. I didn't have any idea whose it would be. The shadows returned me to nothing. Went wrong. Nothing you could do. You don't know that. Had I been there, I should have one friend doesn't outweigh another. Did I know those men? They sounded well. One was cold, clinical. The other was concerned? Guilty? Faint static when I came semi-conscious again. I was highly aware of painfully sharp scents, disinfectants. They made me want to sneeze, but my body didn't have the energy. Ikirio-san? Can you hear us? I feel your chakra fluctuating. What's chakra? Ikirio? Wasn't my name V. Will stabilize soon. You don't need to worry. She's family. Irika-sensei, it's different. You consider her family, Naruto-san? Naruto? Why did that name make my chest feel sharp? My eyes stung. I couldn't move. For 5 years now. I live with her, Yano. Anrei-san, when no one else cared, she gave me a chance. Told me to think like a ninja and act like one. Why would they? Why would anyone? She's no shinobi. She's not Irika-sensei. Why did she? Was he crying? I wanted to croak out something, but just trying to move my fingers sent me unconscious again. Hasn't left your side much. I faded into awareness mid-conversation again. I did that a lot. Inoichi and I bring his work for him from both schools. It's rather shocking though. We have to go in Henge to pick up his work from the civilians. They're worried too. I had no idea, and me running TNI, that you had so many civilians as connections. I hope. There was a pause to the deep voice, raspy as though he'd been talking for a long time. I guess I always hoped you'd stay to our circles. Come to think of it, I don't know why I did. No one knows. No one sees you for what you are. We'll need to have a strong discussion, I think. Not just the pack, not this time. Ino and Naruto are so worried as well, and even Inoichi's little prim and proper wife. I just realized we don't know her real name? We always called her Koi because she's like those pretty fish that Inoichi was so infatuated with for a while, and Inoichi calls her that as an endearment. I feel like maybe I let a lot more slip away than I should have. You'd give me a look right now. You would. You'd just give me an even look, maybe lift a brow, and I'd be stuck trying to think what I was missing. With my human mind, because I didn't trust my instincts enough. Ever since then you've always been on my case about my instincts. I get it, I do. A heavy sigh. The sound made me want to whine. That voice, that rich tone that I felt in my bones was so much a part of me that names meant nothing. Should never sound so tired. So defeated. So hurt. It wasn't right, ever since then. But I didn't start out with the instincts, so I fight them. My mind refuses to accept that I could work off just a gut feeling because there's no logic to it. There's no rational basis, and I don't have the senses that you do. Hell, even the Gaki has them, though that is self-explanatory. A long pause. I heard something beeping slowly, but little else. Whomever was speaking did so while holding utterly still for great stretches of time. There was a faint sound, a pressure to my fingers as they were enfolded in another set, that clutched at me like a lifeline. If another long pause, there was a choking sound, faint as it was. I don't even know what the official story is. I'm slacking off. Because the sight of you here, so still. You aren't still. Not you, Anrei-chan. Not you. Never. Your stillness was that of a watchful, indulgent predator from the start. It's part of what Inoichi and I adored about you, why we saw promise when you couldn't manage like everyone else. You'd hit me now if you were awake, but I set privacy wards. I'm not foolish. You saw. Back then, but we never said it. You were just so still and quiet, and anyone else may have seen it as sulking or disappointed. It was a watchful quiet. A predator stillness. It was before the menace came. I remember talking to my mentor about you, and he said if I saw something no one else did, to approach you. I miss him. He died with so many when the QB attacked. Another sigh that tore at my heart. A long stretch of silence. I know Inoichi told me he wasn't sure what it was about you. We just knew you were different. We took you under our wing. We stayed by you. It was still shocking when you shared the change. Why you would always be civilian. Knew. I hope you picked up on how when we found out, figured out the pieces to the puzzle, that it was half of why we focused on advancing so fast. We needed to be the ones there for you. We needed to make certain you had those you could trust. There was a dull thud, like something slammed into another solid object. This Anrei is why. There was that annoying beeping again. A warmth pooled and flowed over my limbs as my thoughts finally steadied. I once was victory. I hated my name. I had a good life, though many would say I'd accomplished little. I explored. I created. I lived rather than just existed. I never truly fell in love. I never had a family outside those I was born related to. I was okay with that. I died young. I was now Anrei. I had a family that had died out, an extended clan I loved, and though we didn't always understand each other, they were dear to me. I had found my soulmates in my brothers, my pack, Inoichi and Ibiki. I had extended family through Inoichi's wife Reiha. I did know her name, their daughter Ino, and my own adopted baby brother Naruto. Naruto, who held within him the nine-tailed fox, whose birthday was on the 10th of October, a day I'd been forced to be outside of Konoha on a mission with someone I had never worked with before. Someone who abandoned me to save his skin. It rankled. I had been the entire goal of his mission. I had been playing helpless civilian with the idea that he would potentially be okay to work with besides Crane. It was an escort mission to Kumo and back to visit some friends I had there. Very distant family, not ones who even knew of the bloodline trait I held, much less possessed the ability for it. Sadly, he was dead. I'd seen him cut in half. Served the traitor right. The shinobi had been from some place with a music note on the headband. I remembered 5 of them, that I couldn't risk going ghost because there was more than I could take on alone. What happened after? There was a block. I had the feeling from V that it was necessary. Whatever instinct from my once self that alerted me to information she somehow knew impacted me, was also telling me I didn't want to know. I was tired. Crane visited. Secretly, at night, befitting ANBU. I felt his grip on my hands and tears along my arm. He was clutching my hand in his and crying softly, silently. Crane always did take things so personally. He hadn't been with males. So silly. I came before, one another Umbu was with me. Thought it was because usually I escorted the civilian and I hadn't taken the job that I felt guilty not knowing we were trying to see if anyone else would be fine to work with you, but I didn't need to stay if I hadn't, but I was so concerned with Kakashi. He was having a bad episode because it was that anniversary coming up. He never got over losing them, you know. His sensei's wife, his teammates, and father, so I was trying to make certain he would be out of his shell. I'm so sorry though. I don't know how to express that. Not truly. I would promise you something outlandish to startle a laugh out of you, but we've never met without our masked personas. I am so used to seeing you flinging or directing an opponent towards my vengeance, it never occurred to me to mention you used to be so hard to work with. You weren't, you know? Your brothers tried to convince me, but from the start, even if it wasn't fluid as it became later, you were easy. I suppose we just work well together, you're the support. Something I always was lacking. I think, men and their dramatic pauses while I'm unable to respond. Truly. Konoha is full of drama queens. I swear if Crane can help himself and has some sort of rose or sparkling background jutsu going on while I'm stuck here, I'll hit him later. It's a rare and precious thing. Inspiring others just through your own actions. I would like to do that, my darling friend. For others, someday, as you know, I am to play Jounin instructor and take on students. I hope to use your example of being there only when needed but allowing someone else to shine, to take the credit and the glory you always do. You disable and disorient the opponents, but you let me finish them off, trusting